Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tettey. In case we haven't met already, my name is Hayat. I'm a master colon hydrotherapist. This is actually my second career. I started out in the corporate world and had a wonderful, successful career, embarked on a healing journey of my own, and that journey led me to pursuing a career within the health and wellness arena. And 16 years later, here I am. So as you can imagine, I learned quite a bit along my journey. And it's kind of, I guess I would say I feel obligated with a passion to share some of the things that I learned. And that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to teach you about the food combining principles and how you can incorporate that into your own journey. It centers around gut health, but it's so much more than that. And you'll see that as I present this evening. Okay, so let's delve in. All right, so tonight we're going to learn about the basics of food combining. We're going to explore meal suggestions for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'm going to give you several examples. And this is just a starting point to give you a foundation. You can then add on from there, okay? And we're going to talk about transit time. So when I refer to transit time, I'm actually referring from the time you eat to the time it leaves your stomach, okay? That's keeping in mind that that food matter still has to move through 30 feet of internal plumbing, 25 feet of your small intestine and 5 feet of your large. Okay, so there's a lot of territory to cover as this food matter is moving through your body. So it's very important to not only bring in real, healthy, clean food, but to chew our food, break it down as best we can, and also follow a method that's going to allow the body to effectively break down the food in a more efficient manner, okay? We're going to talk about the quick exit hierarchy of food. Basically, that's a list of foods from fastest to slowest in terms of leaving your stomach. Okay, and then finally, I'm going to cover a few tips for you to incorporate. All right. All right, so what are these guidelines all about, right? So the principles are based on the concept that certain foods go well together and complement each other biochemically, right? You have other foods or food groups you can put together in a meal, and they will actually hinder each other's ability to break down. And that could cause that meal to take 2 or 3 times more or longer to break down than a properly combined meal. So we're going to learn about what that consists of. Now, this method advocates specific combinations of food to optimize digestion, reduce gas and bloat, and improve bowel function. So in a nutshell, it's helping to improve gut health. But as I mentioned, it's more than just that. By following these principles, you can maximize the absorption of nutrients. You can increase your energy levels, and you can support weight loss and overall health, right? So the improvement in the absorption of nutrients is really the result of the body being able to break down that food in an efficient manner. The increase in energy levels is because the food is broken down more efficiently, less energy, less time is spent in breaking down the food. Now the body can take that energy and put it into reserve for other use, okay? Now the reason it supports weight loss is that many times when we're feeling hungry, it's because the body is saying, I need some fuel, right? Well, when we're bringing in food or meals that's not allowing the body to properly break that food down, we're not getting all the fuel that we can from that meal. So therefore, we're going to be hungry and we're going to tend to eat more or more meals or more snacks. By bringing that into an efficient method of breaking down the food, now we're not as hungry because that fuel was properly utilized and stored for us to use as we need, right? So all of these things that I just mentioned will impact and improve the overall health of our bodies, okay? All right. So let's talk about the 5 food groups. And these 5 food groups are going to be represented on the food combining chart that I'm going to go over next. The groups are proteins. That's going to be your seafood, your animal proteins, your eggs. It's going to be nuts. Okay, those are just a few examples. Your fats and oil, that could be avocado, it could be butter, cream, oils like olive oil, flaxseed oil, etc. Okay, then we have starches. That encompasses rice, pasta, bread, potatoes, grains, rice, things of that nature. And then we have low to non-starch vegetables, and that's spinach, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, bok choy, you name it. There's so many. And then we have fruits, okay? Apple, pomegranate, grapes, cherries, so forth and so on. So the next chart, we're going to talk about which of these groups play well together and which actually get in the way of each other's ability to be broken down. Okay, so in this chart, we have 3 of the 5 groups being presented in these first 3 columns, okay? So I'm going to talk about 2 of those columns. I'm going to talk about proteins and I'm going to talk about starches. And the reason I'm focusing on those 2 is because those are the 2 most challenging food groups for the body to break down, okay? They have very little water content or juice, if you will, and it takes some time to break them down. So what happens when we bring in, say, a piece of steak or lamb chops, the body is going to release an acid medium to break that down, right? So we talk about the body as being a machine, but there's a lot of chemistry involved in the working of the body as well. But when we eat starch, whether that's a potato or rice that we're having with that protein, now the body's going to release an alkaline medium to break down that starch. The challenge is that when the acid and alkaline are together, they neutralize each other's ability to do their job. They get in the way of digestion. It's just like if you have a fire going on and then you pour water on that fire still might be going, but it's not as strong as it was before you poured the water on it, okay? So you're weakening the breaking down of that meal. So if we can keep those 2 separate, you will feel a difference in what's taking place in your digestive system, and you're going to feel more energy. You're not going to feel weighted down and tired after a meal, okay? So how do you read this chart? When I first prepared this chart, I had red arrows for what you couldn't combine together, and I had green arrows for what you could. And it just started looking like a crazy map. that led you to nowhere. It was just very confusing. So I took those out, and instead I put notes underneath each group so that you can see what you can combine and what you should not. And so let's take, for example, the protein column. You will see underneath the list of proteins, and these lists are not complete, it's just to give you a flavor of what's in these categories. The notation will give you information such as proteins and starches should not be combined, as we covered, right? Proteins and fats and oils, which would be the second column, should not be combined. And then third point, proteins combine well with low to non-starch vegetables. Now, the fourth note I want you to keep in mind, even though it has nothing to do per se about combining, is really helping the gut when it comes to digesting food. It's really best to limit a concentrated protein, just one per meal. So I know a lot of people like what they call surf and turf, but it is challenging for your body to break down those two proteins within one meal, okay? So we talked about the three columns. Now let's talk about this row that's going across. This row, the low and non-starch vegetables, the reason I positioned that there is because all the food groups above it combines well. So anything above low starch, non-starch vegetables, whether it's protein, whether it's fats and oils, whether it's starches, pairs perfectly fine with anything in that row, okay? So the only notation that's provided for low or non-starch vegetables is that they combine well with all the above three food groups, okay? So let's take a step back. Does that mean that you can't have your pasta? No, you can have your pasta, but instead of having pasta with what they call a meat gravy with your ground up tomato sauce with the ground up meat, you can have it with something like broccoli rabe sauteed in garlic and olive oil. You can still have your steak, or you can still have your fish, but maybe that's with asparagus or bok choy. There's so many choices to add variety while still pairing your meals in a way that's going to be efficient, okay? Now, what gets tricky is when we get down to the fruit category. Now, the reason it gets tricky is because fruit is actually broken up into 4 subgroups. You have acid, and those are typically gonna be the things that come to mind when you think of something acidic, and lemon, grapefruit, right? Then the subacid will be apples, sweet apples, because in the acid group, those acidic, or how can I say, sour apples, like a Granny Smith, can go in the acid column. But a sweet apple is within the subacid group, okay? Then we have sweet. The sweet group, bananas, dates, figs, raisins, and so forth. And then we have the melon group, cantaloupe, crenshaw, watermelon, honeydew, etc. So there's a set of rules just for fruits. And again, this sounds complicated, but I'm going to tell you how to tackle this chart so you can get the hang of it. Melons, because of their high water content, really should be eaten alone and not mixed with any of the other sub-fruit groups. They're going to move through your system quicker than anything else, right? Now, if you were to combine the sub-fruit groups, because maybe you want to make a fruit salad, it's better to stick with the subacid and sweet sub-fruit group, okay? That will be easier for your digestive system to break down, okay? So we have a saying that when it comes to fruit, you should eat it alone or leave it alone, meaning leave fruit alone. Again, it's all about the water content and how quickly that fruit moves through your body, okay? So it should be consumed on an empty stomach as opposed to eating it with a meal, okay? Underneath, again, we have our little notes. It says fruit is not recommended as a dessert, right? And so many times we're eating fruit as a dessert because we don't want to eat the cake. We don't want to eat the pie, but we have a sweet tooth that wants to be addressed. What happens when we eat fruit after a meal is that that fruit is sitting behind that meal and it can't go anywhere. It's trying to move through, but it can't. So the sugars, the natural sugars from that fruit is going to start to ferment that meal that is sitting on top of. And that fermentation is going to cause gas and bloating, and it's going to zap your energy, right? So again, fruit should be eaten alone on an empty stomach, okay? Now, say you've had a meal and you're ready to snack on a piece of fruit. What's a good time to do that? Well, if that meal that you had prior was a properly combined meal, then you want to wait at least 3 hours, right? But if that meal was an ill combined meal, was not the most favorable combination, you want to wait at least 8 hours before you have that fruit, okay? So how to tackle this chart, because looking at it, hearing about it, it absolutely feels overwhelming or sounds overwhelming. My recommendation to you is to take a look at the meals that I'm going to present examples of in the slides to come, and decide which meal do you think you can be able to tackle, just focusing on one meal a day. And once you get that under your belt, where it becomes second nature to you, and it won't take long because you're not trying to learn all of this at once, you're focusing on one meal. Then go to the next meal till you get all 3 meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Now, do you have to follow this combination of food for every meal, every day of your life? Absolutely not. It's just to help aid your digestive system, improve your energy, and so much of your overall health. Okay, so during the holidays, absolutely feel free to splurge. We're enjoying company, we're celebrating. But what you want to do is then, once you've enjoyed yourself, now you want to reset. So how do you reset? Reset is easy. Start following the food combining principles again. And then you can also do, and I'm going to steal this from Coach Jamard, is that for the next 2 to 3 days, you want to consume salads, soup, and smoothies, because these are so easy for your body to digest. It will give your body time to reset after that heavy indulgence, okay? The other thing that I want to point out, and this is a question that comes up all the time, when I'm referring to food combining basics, I'm only referring to food in whole form. I am not referring to smoothies. I'm not referring to making juice blends, and I'm not referring to plant-based protein shakes that you're adding several of these components in. The body doesn't have to break those liquids down. They're already broken down. All it has to do is absorb. It's only when it's in a whole form where the body does have to break that food down is when we want to follow these food combining basics. Okay. All right, so let's talk about breakfast. These are some examples that you can have for breakfast, And like I said, this is just a starting point to give you a foundation, and you could build from there. You can mix and match. What you see in parentheses, those are conservative timelines for when that food or meal leaves your stomach. Okay, so vegetable juice, depending on the volume, can take about an hour to leave your stomach. Therefore, it's going to take little to no energy. Okay, fresh fruit, about an hour. Again, it's full of water, juice, if you will. Okay. Now, if you take fruit and now add an avocado, which is a fat, takes a little longer to break that healthy fat down, it's going to be 2 hours. And your smoothie or your plant-based protein shake can take anywhere from 1 to 2 hours, really depending on what you're putting in that shake or that smoothie, whether that shake is the consistency of like really a thick shake or liquid, more of watery type of liquid. That will determine how fast it goes through your system, right? Now, if we take avocado toast or coconut butter toast, that can take anywhere from 3 to 4 hours, depends on the volume. Now, if you look at the picture that I have to the left, that avocado toast has egg on it, which is a protein. Just by adding that egg, believe it or not, it will double the transit time of breaking that meal down. So it can take upwards of 8 hours to leave your stomach. And again, depending on the size of the meal that you're eating. And then overnight oats can take anywhere from 3 to 4 hours. Okay. All right. Now for lunch, you might want to eat light, and that may only consist of a green leafy salad that you've thrown different things in. 2 hours to leave. And again, depending on the size of the salad. But you might say, you know what? I want something a little heavier. So now you can take that salad, add an avocado to that, right? And got a healthy fat that you're adding. And typically when we're adding healthier fats to our meals, it actually gives us more of a sense of being satiated. And therefore we can go longer before needing another meal after that. So if you then take that salad with avocado and follow it with cooked vegetables, now you can see how the time frame is moving up, right? And then if you add a starch or a grain, you're talking about 4 hours. Now, I want to focus on this word followed. The reason you want to have your green leafy salad first is because that raw food has live enzymes that's going to aid in breaking down your meal. But when you're doing a completely cooked meal, then you want to make sure you're taking, especially if you're not chewing your food well enough, you want to make sure you're taking digestive enzymes as a supplement to help break down your food. Okay. Now, the next one is green leafy salad, followed by cooked vegetables. But now you might say, I want something crunchy. I want to crunch on some nuts. Texture is also key. It's always good to have different textures in the meals that you eat. It makes the meal more satisfying. So that meal is going to take anywhere from 3 to 4 hours. And then you might say, I just want to keep it simple, salad, followed by a handful of nuts. Again, 3 to 4 hours, depending on what you call a handful, So these are just, again, some examples of what you can do for lunch. And I'm also now going to go into dinner. And sometimes clients actually switch what you're going to see presented for dinner for their lunch and vice versa. It's, again, knowing your body, becoming acquainted with your body, noticing how your body responds to different foods or different meals. Okay. Now for dinner, again, green salad because of the live enzymes. But you might say, you know what, Hayat, I've had enough of salad. I just want a dinner without it. And it's okay. Then you can have your cooked vegetables. You can add some starch or grain to it if you desire, some heavier food. So you can see if you're just going from the cooked vegetables, it can be upwards of 3 hours, but as soon as you're adding the starch or the grain, then it could be upwards of 4 hours. Okay. Now, what I want to point out is this second item. As soon as we add an animal protein to our meal, you will see that transit time bumps up to 6 hours. Okay, so 6 hours means that's energy being exerted to break that food down. Okay, it's why some people prefer to have a heavy meal at lunch, giving the body extra time to break it down, as opposed to having it for dinner. Because if you're eating dinner at 6, and say, for example, you eat a 6-hour meal, then if you go to bed at 9, that meal is still not finished. And so you're going to go to sleep and wake up not feeling so great because that food is still present in your stomach. Okay. So again, these are just to give you some examples or ideas of what it involves, transit time wise or energy wise, to break down our meals so that we can make better choices. So you might say, well, suppose I don't have a chart with me and I want to determine whether something is going to move through my system fast or slow. It's really easy to do. What you want to do is visualize your meal. Okay, and I'm going to start from fruit and then I'm going to move up. If you were to take melon, any melon, and say you slice that up or you put it in cubes, and if you put that melon in your hand and squished it, you would have all this juice and water running down your arm. It would be pulverized. That's how quick and easy it is for your body to break it down. So it's going to leave your stomach very, very quickly. Now, when it comes to a fruit, say a pear or an apple, you can cut those in slices, put it in the palm of your hand and squeeze. You're going to be able to break that down into small pieces, but you won't have as much juice running down your arm. So what that means is that it's still easy for the body to break down, it just takes a little bit longer, just a tad bit, right? The trickiest one would be the banana, because the banana is really a starch. It actually, that starch begins to change the more ripe the banana becomes. And that's why we should eat a banana, not when it's green, but when you start seeing those brown little specks. It's an indicator that it's at a point where a lot of the starch has gone. Okay, so a banana, even though it's soft, you can put that in your hand, you can squish it, but there's no juice whatsoever going to be running down your arm, right? Because of the starchy nature, bananas, again, depending on the size of the banana, can take about 45 minutes to leave your stomach. Okay. Right. So let's talk about what leaves your body fast and what leaves slow. Okay. So we just talked about this. Raw fruits and vegetables full of juice. They're what we call water rich. They're going to move through the fastest. Then comes lightly cooked, whether that's sauteed, roasted, or steamed, low or non-starch vegetables. Okay. Then we have raw nuts and seeds. Nuts and seeds in raw form are actually soft. They become crunchier and drier when we roast them. So it's actually why when it comes to making your own nut milk, you have to use raw nuts, because the raw nuts are able to absorb that water to help produce the nut milk. Okay. Next would be raw, stone pressed or cold pressed plant oils. Okay. Whether that's avocado oil, olive oil, grapeseed oil, etc. Okay. Then would be cooked starchy vegetables. Again, because of the starchiness, it takes a little bit longer. It's just a little bit more challenging for the body to break that down. Okay. Whether that's pumpkin, whether that's potato, it does take longer for the body to break it down and pass it on beyond the stomach. Then we have raw unpasteurized dairy products. Now I have this listed because in some states you still can get raw dairy products, but in most states you cannot. It's illegal. And what's very interesting about that is that raw unpasteurized dairy, especially sheep and goat milk, there are studies that show that it's much easier for the body to assimilate those than the commercial milks that we're drinking. And next in line would be whole grains. And now again, we're at the portion of the list where it becomes more and more of a challenge and more time is required to break these things down. Whether that's quinoa, whether that's millet, there's a host, okay? Then we have pasteurized dairy and animal flesh. So there's many issues with how people's bodies respond to dairy. It can cause some issues with creating mucus and binding them up, so forth and so on. So it is a little bit more challenging for the body to break down, okay? And hopefully, if you're consuming dairy, hopefully it's organic, or if you're consuming poultry, it's free range or wild caught seafood, okay? Next, we have all non-whole grain, which really is processed flour products, whether that's bread, tortillas, pasta, so forth and so on. And then last would be cooked animal fats, whether that's lard, whether that's tallow, hydrogenated oils, canola oil, vegetable oils, and then would be the mainstream meats that they're doing all kinds of things with, and then in poultry, as well as soy products. So that's the hierarchy in terms of what's easy down to the bottom of what's the most challenging for the body to digest. All right, and then next, here are some tips for you. Avocados are technically a fruit, and a lot of people get hung up with that because it has a pit, but it behaves in the body as a healthy fat. So feel free to add that to salads, add it to your protein shakes, your smoothies. It's going to add a healthy fat. And again, it's going to help you to feel satiated and not need a meal so soon after consuming it. The next 2 points really relate to one another. Fruit should be consumed on an empty stomach. We talked about that. And it should never be eaten as a dessert, okay? We don't want to cause fermentation. We want to allow the body to move food through as quickly as possible. Now, suppose you've eaten a meal and you want to know if you can switch to a different food group. Yes, you can. You want to wait 3 to 4 hours after eating the previous meal before switching food groups. And really, that's a good time frame, in terms of what's thinking about when is a good time to eat your next meal. But I also take it further. My thought is that we shouldn't be eating unless we're hungry. If the clock strikes 12, doesn't mean you have to eat lunch unless you're hungry. Because the clock strikes 6 doesn't mean you have to eat dinner unless you're hungry. Okay? The body's not going to let you starve. It will let you know when it's hungry. Okay? Now, the next 2 points, this one and this one, are really connected. When eating a totally raw meal, you can get away with combining avocados, raw nuts and seeds, dry fruit, and a small amount of fresh fruit. Okay? Again, the reason being is that the live enzymes and the raw food is going to help the body break down this meal. Okay? And then the next bullet, nuts, seeds, and dry fruit go better with raw vegetables. Like I said, it ties to the previous bullet point. And the last bullet, if you are going to have an ill-combined meal, do so when the body has plenty of time to move it out of your stomach before the next meal. Again, giving your system grace to get caught up, if you will. And again, that's going to help replenish your energy reserve. Digestion is the second energy consuming function of your body. So we want to do our best to provide a time frame for it to take a break. Okay. And then in conclusion, ill-combined meals divert energy to your stomach for hours on end. You know, we talked about that throughout the presentation. The body's energy is being used to break down food nonstop, rather being freed up to cleanse, renew, and to heal. You know, when we get ill, say we have, let's say, an infection or a virus. Well, our immune system needs energy to do its job. And if we're depleted in energy, we're getting in the way of that healing process. Now, suppose you were in an accident, you broke a bone, where the body needs energy to repair and rejuvenate and regenerate. Well, again, we have to free up energy so the body can utilize that energy to do so. Okay? So the principles are an effective tool to improve gut health, maximize nutrition absorption, increase energy levels, and support weight loss and overall health. So what I want you to do is focus on enjoying your meals while improving food choices. Basically, you're just tweaking what you're pairing together. That's it. Okay? You can continue to eat the healthy foods you enjoy. You're just changing what you're putting on the plate at the same time. So I hope you found this helpful. And again, if you have questions, leave them in the chat and we'll address those at the end of both presentations. Thank you so much for letting me spend time with you. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Coach Hayat. That was a lot of information. I think we just want to say, can you say that again? Wow. So I'm just going to take everyone off mute so we can give you a round of applause because that was awesome before we even go any further. So thank you so much for breaking that down.
Thank you, Coach. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
They might see.
Okay, so I want everyone to just put how they're feeling right now in the chat. I think that will be helpful for Coach Hayat. And like I say to you all, this is all about levels and elevation. And perhaps maybe this is your first time in a HeartSmarts meeting, and this is a lot of information for you. For those of you who will be going raw with me in September, this was helpful to see all the raw listed at the top of the list and all of that. So just share if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you feel like this makes sense to you, it's something you can do. And I think, Coach Hayat, the best thing to do would probably be to look through the questions in the chat while Coach Jay is presenting, not answer them yet, but it'll give you some context into what people are looking for in terms of answers. And as people continue to share how they're feeling, and you all can also put your questions in the chat for Coach Hayat so that she can, again, prepare her answers. So when Coach Jay is finished, then we'll do the tag team like we did last time. So we'll ask each one a question. So let me bring Jay on. All right, so welcome back, Coach Jay. Do you have a presentation, a slideshow to share as well, or are you just gonna present?
No, I have a presentation.
Okay, great.
If I don't give myself guidelines, I'll go all over the place. I'll be talking about the moon.
Awesome. So, all right. So I'm going to get off, and then you can share your screen.
All right. Let's see here. I'm gonna do that, and then we're gonna click buttons. All right, and I gotta close that. And pardon me, I gotta talk myself through this part or else I'll get lost. And then we're going to do that. Okay, everyone can see that, right?
No, it's just black.
It's just black. All right, let's exit and let's stop share. Okay. And let's go to share screen again. And let's just go to desktop share. Okay, and then let's press that. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. All right, so really quickly, my name is Jay Jamard Banks Sr. I'm a clinical herbalist for those who don't remember me or may have never seen me before. I've done a few presentations here. I'm basically a clinical herbalist. I'll give you a really quick synopsis of how I got into this business. I started off in pharmaceuticals, did about 8 years of pharmaceutical as a certified pharmacy tech, and kind of fell out of love with Western medicine. Dropped my lab coat. I picked up a gun and a badge, became a state law enforcement officer for 16 years, got sick about 5 years ago, and went on a journey to heal myself. So essentially, I ended up finding an African herbalist out in Uniondale, New York, who got me started on herbalism by teaching me how to pull certain herbs out of my backyard, using them in conjunction with herbs that he sold me, and then putting me on a high spice raw foods diet, which I did. About 5 days later, I felt absolutely immaculate. It was like the brain fog that I didn't even know existed was lifted. And immediately I enrolled to school. I've been in school ever since, currently pursuing a PNP, which is a doctoral degree in phytochemistry. Which would be the equivalent to, I guess you would call it like the equivalent to a pharmacist in Western medicine, but I would be the holistic side of phytochemistry or herbology. So here I am today. Now, I'm no longer a law enforcement officer. I just practice natural medicine and I help people heal themselves. I like to not really consider myself a healer. I think most healers who are healers don't even consider themselves healers. Our job is just to share our own experiences, tell you what we know so that you can get on that journey for yourself. So today I decided that there was a lot of information that I wanted to provide you. So I think at this point, there's always tons of questions. We're just gonna turn you guys into herbalists. So I'm gonna give you just a little bit of herbology. All right. And we're going to basically learn how to do different functions. So, in the future, should I come back, I'm going to actually take this this series into a little bit greater detail so that you can actually learn how to make your own forms of medicine out of plants. And then we're going to take 1 or 2 plants and just really dive deep into that plant so you can know exactly what it does for you before we start getting into different combinations. All right. So we're just going to learn just a little bit of herbology. All right, so I'm just going to speed through the history on herbalism and healing. I'll explain the pictures as we're there. So this is actually a picture of teasel. I was on a hike and I found teasel. It was calling to me. Some of you may be familiar with it, but it's most well known for disrupting a particular bacteria called Borrelia. And the Borrelia bacteria actually is one of the causes of Lyme's disease. It's carried by the tick, the deer tick. And essentially what makes it unique and what makes it such a difficult disease to manage is because it actually hides inside like the cells. So the white blood cells can't actually find it. What Teasel does is it actually pushes it out of the cell. So it forces the Borrelia out of the cell so that your white blood cells can actually come right behind and then gobble them up. That's what makes it such a unique plant. In addition to that, it does have some nerve nourishing qualities to it that makes it really good for autoimmune disorders, especially things like multiple sclerosis. It's a little tricky to harvest. Not that it's a painful plant, but the plant, as you can see, sometimes plants tell you exactly what they do when they're showing you what it is. And you can see all these tiny little spines. So it looks like it's telling you something about the nervous system. If you hurt all over, I'm for you. That's basically what it's telling you. So, but in order to harvest this plant, you actually have only 2 periods. You don't want to catch it in its flowering season. You want to either catch it at the end or at the very beginning. The best medicinal parts of it is going to be in the roots. And you never want to catch it flowering, because when it's flowering, all of its energy is actually into pollinating and setting its flower. So all of the energy or the phytochemicals will not be in the roots during that time. So you're either looking at early spring or fall going into winter. It's going to be the best time to grab it, because that's when it's going to pull its nutrients back into the soil. Okay, so going back in the history of herbalism and healing, basically herbalism has been used for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And we do have some documentation and papyrus that we can look at to show that every civilization has been using herbalism to some degree. In ancient Egypt, we have papyri dating all the way back to 1700 BCE, where they were using things like juniper, garlic, hemp, and poppy. Okay, so poppy, I think they were using for kids to kind of make them calm down if they were too energetic. And as we know, poppy seeds have chemical compounds that are very similar to heroin or morphine. And in ancient Greece, developed theories such as humors and essential body fluids, and Hippocrates categorized herbs by fundamental quality. Okay, so as they started to adopt the information from ancient Egypt, ancient Greece started to come up with their own theories and practices as well. And then it went from there into Rome. And then Rome, funny is that Rome started to be one of the first who wanted to make it into a lucrative business. I find that very ironic. But they were the first to make it into a lucrative business until Marcus Aurelius came into play. And I believe his physician, Claudius Galenus, was the one who actually challenged that perspective. So that's when they were actually harvesting and using these plants and then selling them to fix symptoms. So if you had a problem, that's where the whole idea of Roman chamomile came into play, because it was such a popular and powerful plant. They wanted to use it for pretty much everything. Okay, and then there's also some religious influence as well. Islamic influence combined both medicinal assets with some of the surviving Egyptian learning. So they were the first to kind of put the two together, because they wanted to still keep some of the traditions and the ancient practices that ancient chem was depicting on their ancient Egyptian cuneiform and hieroglyphs. And then they were combining it with what they was getting from the European influence as well. And then when you start looking at 6th century Christian monks, what they were doing was they were actually taking each of their monasteries, and each monastery was pretty much devoted to one particular herb. So you would have one monastery, all they'd manage was St. John, and they would master and cultivate it and learn how to extract it with different forms and basically become its own personal, like, miniature hospital with understanding of treatment with that particular plant. And then each monastery would then trade their own plants with one another. So they would become complete specialists. Another one that they would use would be skullcap, which is another herb that they used traditionally amongst the monks to help them with relaxing the mind so that they can absorb the information that the Bible had to offer. So that's another one of those herbs. You might have even heard of things like hyssop and others that were mentioned in the Injil or the Bible as well. All right, so what is herbs, or what are herbals? Okay, so we're going to get into what they are. So here's one of the best definitions I found. Herbalism is a traditional medicinal or folk medicine practice based on the use of plants and plant extracts. Okay, herbalism is also known as botanical medicine, medical herbals, herbology, that should be phytotherapy. Okay, the scope of herbal medicine is sometimes extended to include fungal, okay? So we do dabble in mushrooms and mycology, okay? Bee products, minerals, shells, okay? Because you're gonna have seashells and things are gonna have different compounds in them, and certain animal parts. Minerals, some of you may have heard of things like bentonite, zeolite. These clays are used for healing, and this is tools that we often mix into some of our compounds to help synergize other herbs. Bentonite is one that I use very frequently. Ms. Hayat's probably very familiar with it because it's almost in like every single detox I've ever given out to almost anyone, unless there's an allergy. And it's hardly ever anyone with an allergy to dirt. So, but that's one of the best, most complete definitions that we can find, because it's going to include a lot of different approaches. And we want to make sure we include those approaches in understanding what herbalism is. Okay, so now we're just going to dive in very quickly. It's going to be a lot of information. The best way I'm going to say is just kind of think of what sticks to you. You know, if there's a certain thing that kind of calls to you, then we'll delve in a little bit more. But we're just going to talk on the classes of herbs, okay? Because there's about 11 classes. They're all goes in these different categories. I'm going to give some examples of the ones that apply to different classes. And in addition to that, these classes of herbs, a lot of plants, or a lot of these herbs are going to be in multiple classes, okay? But we're just going to give some examples of what classes they apply to so we can have a general idea, okay? So one of my favorite groups is the alternative group, okay? These herbs are essentially, their job is to help clear out toxins and are used to correct conditions and regulate body functions. They're usually nutritive and or excretory processes, okay? These examples of that: red clover, you're probably familiar with, plantain, stinging nettles, golden seal, burdock root. These are detoxifying, cleansing plants or herbs that are used to help correct any imbalances that we have. Some of my favorites, which would include like red clover and especially burdock root. Burdock root is a food. You can have that every single day if you want. There's no reason why you shouldn't have this incorporated. In fact, I think I recently did a post where burdock root can be found in a lot of the Asian markets. You can just go to the market and pick up something called gobo or gabu. And that's essentially their burdock root. And it's a big, long root. It's about this big. And you just chop it up and you throw it in your stew. You could roast it. You can dry it if you want and make it into a tea, whatever works best. It's actually a survival food, as a matter of fact. So when I'm out in the forest, if I want to like rough it, I'll actually go dig up a burdock root and then I'll roast it like a ginormous carrot right on a fire. And then I would consume it. And it has a bitter but sweet taste to it for those of you who haven't had it. But it takes a little getting used to, but I've gotten so used to it now. It's almost like a staple. All right, so the next group is called the astringent group, okay? And essentially these are herbs that draw together or constricts the bodily tissue, okay? And is effective at stopping the flow, okay? Think of an astringent, we can think of witch hazel is an astringent. And in fact, witch hazel, surprisingly, is a very good anti-parasitical, by the way. Red raspberry is an astringent, and white oak bark is also astringent. These are very cleansing herbs. Nettles also falls into this category. So we see where nettles is alterative as well as astringent. And I think nettles falls into about 4 or 5 categories, which makes it such a fantastic herb. Then we have the demulsion group, okay? And what the demulsion group is essentially is, think of anything that is gooey and slimy and mucusy. That's going to be the demulsion group. It is used to soothe irritated mucous membrane. So think of like applying goo to an abrasion. It's going to cool and soothe. It's also going to cool and soothe things that are inside the gut as well. Okay, they're used for things like the common cold and cough. And some examples of that is like marshmallow root, slippery elm. Sea moss is part of the demulsion group because we watch it turn into a goo, and then when we consume it, it's still a goo. And what does it do? It goes in just like a goo. Mullein and plantain. Mullein is also very gooey. When it's extracted, it helps to improve the mucous membrane lining, which is what makes it great for things like coughs and upper respiratory infections. And plantain, if you're not familiar with it, it grows like everywhere. I mean, between every crack of concrete, you're going to see plantain leaf sprouting through. And plantain, if you ever pick it, which is an edible plant, You can pick it and chew on it. If you're ever out in the forest or you scratch yourself or you have a cut or abrasion, you can simply chew the plantain leaf and activate its phytochemical compounds and literally plaster it on whatever wounds you have, even if it's like a bee sting, and it will soothe and cool it. It's one of the oldest, most useful plants that we've used for thousands of years, essentially for healing. And remember, anything that we can do outside the body that's good for the skin is good for inside the body, and vice versa. If you're putting something on your skin that you would never eat, it doesn't belong in your skin. All right, so we're going to move on to the fourth group. That's going to be the expectorant group. Okay, so these are going to be used to aid in the decrease and expelling of excessive accumulations of mucus that can show up in the throat and the bronchi. So things like wild cherry bark. Here's stinging nettle leaves again, but the leaves are actually pointed out in this one. The roots would not be considered an expectorant. Okay, pine bark and Solomon seal are other forms of expectorants as well. Diuretic. All right, these are going to be herbs that help with urine flow. Okay, horsetail, juniper, fennel, comfrey. Technically, dandelion would be part of that group as well. Uva ursi would be another one. These are going to be herbs that are going to help with not just help with urine flow, but it's going to help with productive urine flow. Okay. Then we're going to move on to the tonic groups. Okay. Now these are going to be herbs that invigorate and stimulate energy in the body. Okay. These are the ones that everyone wants. And some of the examples, I split them up. For women, you're going to have things like raspberry leaves, strawberry leaves, and there's nettles again. Okay. For men, things like ginseng, saw palmetto, and sarsaparilla. By the way, these are actually interchangeable, but then depending upon hormones, they may have a slightly different approach. But ginseng is very well known, and ginseng is actually, that's a very general word because there's about, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 different types of ginsengs that could be applied here as well. Then we're going to have the group of nervines. Okay, now this is one of my favorite groups as well. These are herbs that function as a tonic for the nerves. Okay, so if you have nervous condition, if you have things like pain, all right, neuropathy, anything that's where the nerves are firing off, you're going to be looking for nervines, things to calm and soothe. Okay, valerian root is known for its ability to calm and soothe. Chamomile, well known for calming and soothing. Catnip, surprisingly, it makes cats very excitable, and for humans, it makes us want to just go right to sleep. Okay, hops, which is used to make beer, or the traditional form of beer, and then vervain, which is a very nerve nourishing plant as well. Okay, then we have the antiemetic group, which basically is one of my favorite groups as well. This includes all the antiviral herbs. Okay, they go in, they kill and or expel unwanted pathogens. Okay, anything that doesn't belong, they go in and they kill it. And what makes this group so unique is that it's so selective. Like, it doesn't just go in and wipe out. And I've had this conversation with a lot of physicians. When they're asking about what some of these plants can do, you know, they want to know is, well, is it going to do this to the human cells? Is it going to do this to the good bacteria? Most of these plants are very, very selective. And when you're using these plants, they're being used with all of their phytochemical compounds that helps to regulate themselves. Okay, so for some of these examples, things like wormwood and black walnut, they're going to go in and they're going to look for viruses and parasites. Okay, so will pumpkin seed. All right, garlic, when used appropriately, will also look for viruses and pathogens and just completely wipe them out when it's used effectively. You want to make sure that the allicin content is being used, which means you're going to slice the garlic, allow the oxygen to activate it, and then consume the garlic within 14 minutes from that opening. You don't want to crush it. If you crush the garlic, you're actually going to oxidize it too quickly, and then you're only going to have the other remaining compounds. You're not going to have the allicin. Allicin is the compound that's going to run through the body unchecked and allow it to basically destroy any unwanted pathogens. And that would be used continuously for 7 to 14 days, and then you would reassess your symptoms. Okay, clove, a highly underrated spice cabinet herb that you can use as well. And of course, everyone's very familiar with oregano oil. Use it selectively. It is not a plant or an oil that I would use on a daily basis. It is only meant to be used as a grenade when you really need to take out a virus or infection. You don't want to use it to prevent a virus or infection. So it's not something that you use as a form of maintenance. It's something you use when you are sick and you know you have the symptoms and you want some additional support. And it would never be my first go-to. Also, don't use oregano oil for children either. It's a little too strong for them. Okay. We also have sudorific herbs that promote heavy perspiration. Okay, Jamaican ginger, bone set, yarrow, sage leaves. They're going to help to. If you consume a lot of yarrow, it will promote heavy perspiration. Okay, and then the diaphoretic group these are the herbs that promote perspiration, but not nearly as intense or even visible as the sudorific group. Okay, so the sudorific group, we're going to watch you sweat. Like you're just going to be dripping and pouring, your skin's going to get oily, and you're going to start to release a lot of toxins. Whereas with the diaphoretic group, you may just get a little shine. Okay, like currently I'm pretty sure I have a little shine right now because I did have something from the sudorific and the diaphoretic group, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Okay, some of those examples are going to be hyssop, yarrow, again, popping up again. There we have chamomile, elderflower, not the elderberry, but the elderflower, burdock, and lemon balm. All of these are part of the diaphoretic group, and they're going to help with expelling toxins and using the skin as well as the kidneys to help flush them out. And the skin is always going to be one of the main go-tos. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to become herbalists, all right? And we're going to learn, Jay's way of making teas, infusions, and decoctions. And the next time we're going to get into things like tinctures. We may even get into syrups, but we're going to start with the basics right now. We're going to learn how to make a good tea, infusion, and or decoction. Okay. All right. So, so these are some images of some plants that I had picked up that I like to make teas and decoctions. Actually, the one on the right, that's something called wood ear, and it's a mushroom. And you wouldn't necessarily make a tea out of it. I would make a broth out of it and then keep the mushrooms in the broth. So that would be something you would make a broth out of. Then you're going to see on the top left, that's me standing next to juniper. They're not nearly frosted yet, so they're not going to be ready till October, November, maybe even December. Those berries have to turn like a nice dark blue, but I found it very interesting that they're already, popping up on the cedar. And then at the bottom left, which is going to be the herb topic of the day, is yarrow flower. And we're going to dive in really deep on this particular flower because of how much use I think all of us can get from it. I think a long time ago, we asked if there was one herb that I would suggest that would be in your medicine cabinet. Ginger would come up as a hard number one because it's something people are familiar with. But if I was to get a little bit more exotic, yarrow is going to be the one that we're going to learn a lot about today. So we're going to dive in a little deep on yarrow, and you're going to see where this particular flower, this plant has such a broad spectrum of uses for us. And we're even going to go as far as to learning how to identify it when you're outside. All right, let's see. So we're going to start by learning some decoctions. Okay, so decoctions are essentially similar to infusions, okay, except that they're made with hard materials such as roots, barks, seeds, nuts, and et cetera, okay? When you're making a decoction, okay, you wanna make sure that if they're dry, that you want to break, hammer, or crush the pieces first, or you're gonna chop them if they're fresh, okay? On the right-hand side, there is an image of that is skunk cabbage, okay? And I'm showing you the roots of the skunk cabbage because that's what we're actually going to use. It looks pretty gross, actually. A lot of people say it looks kind of like a tentacular brain, which is interesting because it does have an interesting effect on the brain, but it's also well known for having some uses with diabetes as well. And as a matter of fact, this particular plant, when it has an uncanny ability of being able to maintain its temperature even in the dead of winter, okay? And when bears come out of hibernation, because their glycemic levels are just off, like completely off the charts, because they've been in hibernation for so long, so they're hungry and they need to regulate their blood sugar levels. One of the first things they go after is they dig up the roots of this particular plant and then they consume it, and it helps to restart their organ system. So this is a very, very powerful plant, not a tasty one, not something I would say consume on a regular basis, but it does have a lot of medicinal and ancient tribal uses in its history. So going back over to decoctions, when making decoctions, I think I'm out of order here. Let me see if I can find where my next slide is. Ah, here we go. Yeah, I am. Looks like let's do this one first. Okay. All right, so we're gonna dive into making teas and infusions first, okay? So a tea or an infusion, which are very similar, okay? They essentially, it's using water, okay? And you're using the soft parts of the plant, meaning the leaves, the flowers, and the stems, all right? And the stems are only gonna be used if it's suggested for that particular plant, okay? And it's only also gonna be used if it's not a woody stem. Woody stems will not be used in making a tea and infusion because the water on its own will not be able to extract what it needs, okay? And then, so you're gonna require just the soft parts or the aerial parts of the plant, okay? Now, here's the big thing when it comes to teas, all right? We wanna make sure that we are avoiding bleached bags. And then when you notice you go to the stores, every time you buy a bag of tea, you're buying a bag of tea and you pull out the tea bag and guess what? It's bleached white. So you'll actually have to look, if you're going to use tea bags, you actually want to find the bags that say unbleached tea bags on them. And there's very few out there. There are several types in Whole Foods I'm familiar with that you can use to make your teas if you're going to use tea bags. But what ends up happening is that the bleaching of the bag interferes with a lot of the phytochemical activity in the tea. The other thing is with tea bags is oftentimes there's not enough of the herb in the tea, okay? So generally you wanna use around about 1 ounce of the dried herb, okay? Or 2 ounces of fresh herb to 1 pint of boiling water in a saucepan. Why in a saucepan? So what happens is you just only want to actually allow your herbs, or what I use a French press for my tea as well. You want to allow the herbs to be able to spread out. They need to be permitted to expand, okay? The other thing is that when you're making your tea, what a lot of people do is they'll make their tea and then they'll let it steep and you see the steam rising from it and it's like, I'm having a hot cup of tea. You need to cover it. Cover that and then allow the temperature to maintain itself so that it pulls the bioflavonoids up and then it cycles back down and then keeps picking them up and it'll keep pulling it out of the aerial parts of that plant. That is the process for making tea, okay? As well as infusions. So you're going to steep, allow it to expand in a saucepan, cover. You're going to add your boiling water. And when you add your boiling water, you are not applying heat. The actual temperature is actually slightly under boiling. You kind of want 212 would be boiling. We actually want it at about 200 degrees. When most of the constituents found in leafy plants will actually break down at about 205 degrees. So you actually want to be a little bit under. So you would boil water. And what I like to do is let it sit for approximately 5 minutes. Then it's super hot water, okay? And then when you cover and steep, give it at least 10 minutes, okay? Now you're making medicinal tea, okay? Because the goal is you want your tea to have a medicinal-like effect. So if you're adding these plants that you're harvesting, then you're gonna, or even if you're using different herbs, like things like cilantro or parsley or basil or what have you, whatever it is you have most of, if you're gonna make something that's medicinal, you're gonna want to add the appropriate amount in the appropriate amount of water, and you're gonna wanna steep that covered for at least 10 minutes. The longer, the stronger, okay? And the ratio is gonna be 1 ounce or 2 ounces of the fresh. So if you have the dried herb, you can use 1 ounce, which is roughly about 2 tablespoons, or 2 ounces of the fresh herb, okay? To 1 pint or 1 mason jar, 1 normal size mason jar of the boiling water in a saucepan, okay? That is the appropriate way to make a tea and or infusion. Actually, I think is this a video? Yeah, that's a video. So this is actually yarrow leaf that I'm making an infusion out of. And as you can see, everything is allowed to unfold, it's allowed to expand. When we have them in tea bags, it stays constricted in one place, it does not unfold, it does not expand, and then we try to squeeze out whatever little bit we can get out of that tiny tea bag. And we're actually leaving a lot of the bioflavonoids behind, especially when it comes to things like green tea, which is such a powerful herb to use. we never let it expand. So if you ever purchase like green tea from the Asian market, if you ever put it in, and you'll see it just swell up and turn into this huge monstrous leaf. That is real green tea. That's what you want it to do, so that you can actually get a full extraction and get all of the bioflavonoids out of that tea. All right. And then, when it comes to decoctions, we're following pretty much the same method, okay? Except with decoctions, we're using roots, okay? It's bark, it's seeds, nuts, anything that's like hardened material, all right? That hardened material does need to be broken up, okay? And you wanna either break it, you wanna crush it, you wanna pulverize it, chop it if it's fresh, okay? And then especially when it comes to roots, because roots are gonna have a lot more minerals in them, okay? Because the roots are in the soil. The bark contains minerals, right? They're gonna have all these hardened minerals. You wanna use glass, enamel, or ceramic, okay? Metal pots with roots don't work that well, okay? Or you wanna make sure you're using something that is not magnetic, all right? So try to stick with glass, enamel, or ceramic, all right? Now, the same thing, again, you wanna add about 1 ounce of the dried herb to about 16 ounces of boiling water, and then you're going to simmer it, okay? We wanna simmer our nuts and seeds and roots because we wanna apply constant heat, all right? Those ligands are gonna break down, and it's gonna allow everything to open up, and the bioflavonoids is gonna leak out to water. And that's when you end up with that super dark, roasted looking cup of tea, which actually isn't tea, it's considered a decoction. Now you just made medicine, okay? And then you wanna make sure you do a low simmer for at least 10 minutes. I always do 15 because again, I like the strongest pull I can get. And then even after I've done that 15 minutes, I'm gonna let it steep for another 5 to 10 minutes. So I'm gonna let it cool off, I'm gonna keep it covered, and I'm gonna allow the bioflavonoids to continue to get pulled. And then you use whichever device you want, whether you're using French press, some people just have a natural strainer, whatever it is that you have. You can even use an old t-shirt or cheesecloth, whatever you have to strain out the grinds. Remember, you can cut back on the effectiveness of that pull if you put them in a small mesh, or you're using like a tea bag of some sort, and then try to squeeze it out. But when it's allowed to expand, think of it like making soup in a crock pot, okay? You're allowing all the flavors to get a chance to breathe and mix within the menstruum of the water. So you wanna be able to allow the plants to do the same thing so that you can get that medicinal effect from them. Okay, and then, okay, so yeah, so when making infusions and decoctions, we can actually use our infusions and decoctions as an eye bath, a gargle, a mouthwash, or even a lotion. Now, when using any of infusions and decoctions, if you're using them to not just for leisure, and you have a specific symptom that you're trying to address, I found the magic number is 4. I'm gonna have someone use something 4 times a day, okay? Because remember, anything that's water soluble is not gonna last very long inside the body. It's gonna get absorbed very quickly. So you're gonna wanna make sure that it stays in the system consistently. So if you're taking a tea for a cold, you're gonna wanna drink that tea 4 times a day. Do not expect it to work once a day. You wanna continue to drink it at least 3 to 4 times a day. I find 4 is a great number. The standard is 6 times a day for acute issues and 3 times a day for non-acute issues. I like the magic number of 4 because it just pretty much covers a little bit of both. So as long as you're consuming it 4 times a day, you're gonna get the results that you're looking for from that particular herb. All right, so again, remember, because this is teas and infusions and decoctions, we're using water, and the water it is going to pull water soluble components. And then if we're 80% water, our bodies is going to absorb it like that. Okay, so we want to make sure that whatever infusions or formulas that we're making it and making sure that it's in the body consistently to yield a medicinal like result. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so now we're going to sidebar a little bit. That is a little kitty that ended up following me home one day, actually about a month ago. And I'm actually bringing this up because we're going to be diving into the herbs. So as you can see, she has a closed left eye. She had a significant eye infection. Sidebar, I basically was walking home, and I ended up seeing this kitten out in the middle of the highway. So me and a few cops, we stopped all the traffic, got her from underneath the truck, pulled her off of a tree. They offered if they wanted to call the animal shelter, and I said, I'm gonna take her home. So I took her home, and now I'm kind of like, I'm stuck. So needless to say, when I got her home, she was very frightened, very scared. And I looked and I saw that she had an eye infection. So I tried to schedule an appointment to get her to the vet. And then, of course, trying to get a last minute appointment, that ended up taking a whole week to get a vet of my choice that I really wanted to go to. So I decided to start doing a little digging, and I found that there was some herbal compounds that works for humans and also can work for animals. So I ended up making a infusion, okay? And as we remember, you can use them for eye baths, gargles, mouthwash, and lotion. So I made an infusion for her eye, and I used 2 herbs, chamomile and another herb called Cistus incanus, which is a very light rose-like flower, okay? Within 1 day, her eye was open. Okay, and that was day 2 after the eye wash. I washed her eye 4 times a day. I would put it on a small piece of tissue, and I would wipe her eye in 3 different directions so that I can make sure I got into the cornea of her eye, because they have that additional eyelid. And by the next day, she had her eye wide open. So now I'm stuck with her. She thinks I'm mommy. I'm actually gonna share a couple of pictures. That's Kashi now. Her name's Kashi. Means City of Light. And so we're like best buds now. So she's like my herbal chemistry mascot. And as you can see, her eyes are back to normal. By the time we had got to the vet, they didn't find anything wrong with her. I even made some eardrops for her as well, because I found that, earworms can also be an issue. But again, there are a lot of the plants that work for us. It does take a little bit of digging, but I'm finding that a lot of the plants that works for us, even for things like cancer and things like that, they also work for some of our pets. But you do want to be very careful. Definitely consult a professional. I am just getting into animal herbology, so I wouldn't even say there's only a handful that I know for sure where I can look at the science and the data. But essentially, it is definitely something that I think people are going to be interested in, and I'm finding a lot of good use out of it. All right, and as you can see, she loves sitting on my shoulder. I'm surprised she's not sitting on my shoulder right now, actually. Let's see. So now we are going to dive into that one herb that I told you guys that I want you to add into your arsenal. Okay, you guys are going to start making tea. All right, and that herb is called yarrow. Okay, yarrow, its Latin name is Achillea mellifolium. Okay, and then off on the side there, you have a picture of Brad Pitt from that old movie Troy, right? So if you think of Troy, Brad Pitt, his name was Achilles. Okay, and Achilles was that Greek warrior that was immune to everything. He was, ultra great at beating people up, and he had only one weakness, right? So if we look at yarrow, we can see Achillea, and there's a similarity there. So there's actually a history of this plant being used by the ancient Greeks, and they used this plant very frequently to mend their wounds, okay? It was good for using to stanch bleeding. It would help to promote cellular regrowth and healing. Okay, so this plant ended up having Achilles' name added to it, but we're gonna just pretty much call it yarrow. Okay, so yarrow, which is the plant that we're gonna learn how to use, which is right now you can go outside and find it. It's pretty much everywhere. Okay, the parts that you're gonna use, all right, is going to be the fresh or dried aerial parts, which means the flowers, the leaves. You can even use the stems as well. I'm sometimey with the stems. I think the stems increase the diaphoretic response. So if I'm already hot, I'm not going to use the stems. But the flowers as well as the leaves are perfect. You can either dry them or you can use them fresh. It's not often mentioned, but this is a plant that people would actually add to, when they dry it, they would actually add it to stews. It is very bitter though, I will warn you. So they would add it to stews and soups because the different mesh of flavors would help cover that bitterness. But its effects are absolutely amazing and well worth the bitterness, if I might add. It's best collected during its flowering period because the flowers have a lot of chi in it, or a lot of its energy is in the flowers. And you're going to want to grab that between the months of June all the way into September. So it's gonna be out there for a while. So now's a good time. Okay, so if you happen to find it along the parks or any of your trails, this is when you're going to find it, or it may even be growing in your backyard and you'd never know. Okay, it's some of its actions, as we remember, it is diaphoretic, it is hypotensive. It is one of the pieces of the formula that I use. Depending upon the client, I will use it to lower blood pressure, to help regulate blood pressure, because it is categorized as what we call a peripheral vasodilator. Okay, so it's going to dilate the blood vessels. It's going to help them to relax and open up and release that blood flow, allow that blood flow to occur. That's what makes it so effective. It actually has some very similar compounds to chamomile, which makes them very, very closely related. Just the taste isn't closely related. It is astringent, it is anti-inflammatory, and oh boy, is it anti-inflammatory. It is considered to also be a digestive stimulant. It is antiseptic, it is diuretic, it is restorative, and it can be used as a regulator for the menstrual system. Okay, some of the common indications, we use this for fevers, colds, hypertension, digestive complaints, loss of appetite. If you're trying to stimulate your appetite, this may be one of the plants that you can utilize. Okay, diarrhea, slow healing wounds if you're using it topically. Now, when it comes to appetite and digestion, the reason why I brought this particular plant up is because I wanted to think of something that we can use, that we can gather, we can learn how to make medicine from, and learn how to incorporate with what Ms. Hayat was teaching us about earlier. So again, when she was teaching us about how we have to use certain food combining. And one of the things that we know is that when it comes to consuming meals, are we supposed to drink water or drink a lot of beverages and things like that when we're consuming meals? The general understanding is actually no. And one of the reasons is because, especially if you're consuming a protein, the last thing you want to do is grab a bottle of 8.9 or 9.5 pH water and guzzle that and expect to have a great digestive process. Because as much as alkalinity when it comes to alkaline diet is appropriate, there are certain parts of it that are not appropriate, such as drinking extremely alkaline water when you're consuming a meal that is protein dense, because protein requires hydrochloric acid, which is in your gut. Hydrochloric acid will get neutralized if you introduce something that is very alkaline, such as water. It will dilute your hydrochloric acid and lower the emulsifying agents and the digestive enzymes that your body needs to produce in order to break down things. So for example, when you're consuming alkaline water, that water is going to lower the hydrochloric acid, which will lower your pepsin, which is necessary to break down and process protein. So the goal generally is that you want to avoid drinking when you're eating. You're either drinking before a meal or in between meals, or when if you're intermittent fasting, you're going to want to consume most of your fluid then. And then when you're eating, whatever water is already, or H3O is already included in your meal, that's where you're going to get your water. Okay, so you want to try to minimize how much you're drinking. There are times where I have my clients, I suggest them to actually drink something, but it's usually to help them break down and digest the foods. And guess what? Yarrow is one of those things that you can actually drink. Why? Because again, it's going to increase your appetite. And the question is, how is it increasing your appetite? Well, it's increasing appetite for those who don't have much of an appetite. But I find that when I consume it, I actually have a really easy time fasting. And what it does is it helps to improve the bile production as well as the digestive enzymes that the body already has on its own. So it is considered to be one of those digestive stimulants. What it really means is it's going to help you produce digestive enzymes, and it's functioning as what we call a digestive bitter. Okay, so drinking a small cup of this tea with your meal will help you process that fat in that meal, because now you're going to end up producing more bile to emulsify it. Okay, so it's a fantastic herb to use either in between meals or even with a meal. And again, if you're using it 4 times a day, you say you eat 3 square meals a day, I don't know who does, but if you do, a cup of this tea will help to assist you in breaking down that meal. It's going to give you everything that you need to break down that meal. Oh, that's okay. There's I guess that was the video. I had no idea. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. I wanted to show, let's rewind. So as you can see, those are the flowers. Okay. When you get very close to it, you want to, whenever we're identifying plants, we want to make sure that we are using all of our senses. Okay. So you're touching it, you're smelling it, and you also taste it. You want to taste your plants. There are very, very few herbs or plants out there that are so toxic that if you take a tiny little taste, it's going to make you fall out. I haven't ran into any. Okay. Tasting is one of the most important techniques that herbalists have in order to identify, because you may forget what something looks like, but you never forget what it tastes like. Immediately, it signals the brain and tells you, oh no, this is what it is. So when you taste a plant, it's activating one of the 90,000 receptors that you have in your tongue, and it's sending a signal straight to your brain. Okay, but visually, what we're going to do is we're going to just look at what this plant looks like up close. You can see that far away, it would appear to be like little balls, but when you examine up close, you can see that they're tiny little daisies. Okay, and these tiny little daisies are going to be connected to a nice stem, and if you can see these leaves, the menophilium, these leaves mean leaves of many. So it's almost as though it's a feather-like leaf where you can see all of these tiny little leaves on as one leaf. And this is the primary dead giveaway for yarrow. Even if you don't see the flower, you're going to see this fern-like leaf attached to a stem. Okay. So if you see a plant with fern-like leaves that isn't actually a fern, then 9 times out of 10, especially if you're on the East Coast, it's going to be yarrow, especially between the months of June and end of September. Okay, we get a little closer. You can actually see it there, and you can see another yarrow right over, right behind it, the flowering head. Sometimes you'll only, I wish I could have got an image of it, but sometimes you'll find where you'll just see the leaves sprouting out of the stem because it hasn't grown to full flower head yet. And you'll see these large leaves on the bottom. Okay, and it's easy. You can simply just take one of these leaves and just taste it. And if it's astringenty and it tastes like it has volatile oils, as well as being extremely bitter, you likely have found yarrow. That is the plant. It has a very unique taste. Once you taste it, you're never going to forget it. And it's not something that is very flavorful. However, the effects that it has on the human body is absolutely amazing. And then I'm going to just dive in on some of the studies too, just to give you some backup information where you can look and see how effective it is, where they're not really advertising too much about this plant. Let's see. And, oh, okay, so that's all with that. Let's see here. Oh, okay, so yeah, we're about to get into the studies now. So let's see if I can find some of the good stuff. We're gonna skip around. So this is just the abstract. So this is from PubMed. Introduction, they're talking about Achillea, and they're gonna get into some of the details there. Some of the history, literary Trojan War and the Iliad. Let's get into what we wanna know. What is it gonna do inside the body? What have they found that it does inside the body? Well, it has a protective activity, meaning it is a free radical scavenger. It is gonna look for things that don't belong, such as free radicals. It's gonna attach itself to it, and it's gonna help the body to carry it out the door. It doesn't like free radicals. Free radicals are essentially all those components that assist in damaging the outside of the walls of the cells in your plasma and your bloodstream. It helps to break that stuff down. This is protective, so it's gonna actually go after those things and dismiss them. Free radicals, they're often found in the brain. This is one of the reasons why berries was such a big deal. This is also in that same category. It's going to have a high auric value and it's going to search for free radicals. Okay. It has a cytotoxicity effect, meaning it is essentially going after cells that don't belong. They didn't, there's actually some additional studies, but I didn't get all the way through them. So I didn't provide you with those particular studies, but when they start talking about cytotoxicity, they're basically calling it anti-cancer, okay? So they're mentioning that it does have some cytotoxicity effects. So it's gonna be picking out cells essentially that don't belong. And this is due to some very methanol-like compounds that are found inside that particular plant. It is anti-diabetic, it is spermatogenic, it is anti-ulcer, okay? Anti-diabetic activity is noted from its ability to manage oxidative stress, okay, that is produced from diabetic condition, is likely involved in the progression of pancreatic damage and diabetes. And they are finding that this plant helps to restore that to normal levels. So this is a plant, because of its ability not just to assist in digestion, it also, as we'll get further in, we're going to see its amazing effects on inflammation. It also has estrogenic activity. It's anti-ulcer. So this is a great plant to use if you have ulcers, okay? And then spermatogenic, meaning it's going to be going after compound or going after microbes, okay? They're going to be found in the bloodstream, all right? This is a big one here. It is immunosuppressive. I mean, it's like saying it's almost having like a prednisone-like effect, okay? It's literally making sure that the body doesn't over-respond. So it's keeping the body, helping the body to help manage how much energy it uses to regulate itself when it comes to managing infections and bacteria, diseases, and imbalances. And oftentimes what happens is the human body just over-responds because it doesn't know how much to use. It uses all of its energy, or it's almost as though it's having a response where it's using a shotgun to kill a fly. And what this does is it allows you to grab the sniper rifle, and actually to kill a fly, you might only need a rubber band. Immunosuppressive is going to help make sure that you choose the rubber band versus the shotgun. That's where I like to compare using oregano oil for cold is like using a shotgun to kill a fly. Save the oregano oil for heavy duty things, or else eventually you won't have any walls to shoot the fly off of. Let's see. Last but not least, and one of the biggest is it is anti-inflammatory. It is extremely anti-inflammatory. So quick story, a close friend of mine, they ended up having a response to some genetically modified foods. And they were having an itchy inflammatory response, which was causing their throat to itch. They were getting itchy on their skin. They were starting to have inflammation in their gut. It was very similar to when they have an exposure to gluten or soy, which they're extremely alerted to, or what we would say having a very severe reaction to those compounds. And because this particular food had genetic modifications, we suspected that there was a cross-contamination and or the genetic modification included glyphosate and or dioxin, which they generally won't tell you. A physician can't say that this particular chemical is what you're allergic to. They have to say that it's either gluten or soy, but it's the chemicals that are inside the gluten and the soy in the United States. So needless to say, I didn't have some of the normal herbs that I would have wanted to use, namely some of the other anti-inflammatories, but then I ended up having some fresh yarrow available. So I made it an infusion out of it. And I ended up giving 3 servings of this infusion. And it was almost like within about an hour and a half, they stopped progressing, because normally the progression we've witnessed would normally last about a day and a half, but their progression ceased. And the anti-inflammatory effects of the yarrow was amazing. It literally not only shut down the immuno response, but it also helped to manage the toxicity load that was in the small intestines. So remember, this chemical compound is very similar to chamomile. And if you ever had a stomach ache and you drink chamomile, what happens? Stomachache generally will go away because it's very soothing. It's going to shrink and cool and soothe that mucosa lining, that soft tissue. Okay, this is why we use these compounds for a teething child, a baby that's teething. If you put chamomile, those compounds on their gums, the soothing and that inflammation goes down. And then what it does is it relaxes them. Same effect from the yarrow. It's bitter, but it definitely did the job. So I ended up having to go back out to the forest. I had to get some more. And then, now I ended up giving it all away. So, but needless to say, there's plenty of yarrow like all around the tri-state area and along the East Coast. So definitely a plant that you want to include into your arsenal. And I think that's it. And that's a butterfly that I found. So I'm just going to close it out there. Hopefully we got a lot of information, and then I'm going to pass it over to you, Dr. Tettey, and I'll sit by for some questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Coach Jay. That was very informative. I'm just going to add Coach Hayat back, and we will give Coach Jay our round of applause at the end, just for the sake of time, because he knows we love him and he knows we're appreciative of his presentation. So just to save time, we're going to go straight into the questions. There are some questions that you all can't see that people are sending to me privately. So I'll start with one of those first. Coach Hayat, for someone who is doing intermittent fasting, when would they eat? Say their window opens at 12 and then it closes at 6. And if they eat something and have to wait maybe 4 hours or more, should they be having one meal a day? Is that how that would work? And the general question before that is, how does intermittent fasting work with the food combining?
So with the intermittent fasting, that whole process itself is helping to ease up your digestive system and giving it a break, right? So even though that process is allowing the digestive system to take a rest, when we do eat, we still want to eat as optimally as possible, right? So you can stick with the combinations that we had listed, but in terms of the time frame, once you break your fast, most people like to eat something more liquid and soft before they progress to something heavy. So I would need to know their window of time, like how longer they're doing the fast, and then what their window of time to eat that window before bedtime.
Okay. And so say it's a 6-hour window, like, because what we've been hearing from some of the other people that are presented, their window opens around noon and they stop eating around 6. So say it's that. Because the main question is, if you're waiting 4 hours or 6 hours for something before you eat something else, how does that work in terms of getting proper amount of nutrition? Because if you weren't doing the food combining, you might say eat every 2 hours or something like that. But now that we've learned about having to wait, how is that? How do you get enough nutrients if you're waiting, but then your window is going to close?
So it's an excellent question. And it's why some people can get away with majority of their lives only eating one meal. Nutrition is based on the quality of food that we eat. Even if that's one meal a day, if that meal is nutrient dense, you do not need several meals a day. So as long as there's quality and nutrient dense foods, you're good. But sometimes people just like to eat. They like to know, I'm going to break my eating up over maybe 2 meals a day. Then what you want to try to do, especially if you have an early bedtime, eat that heaviest meal first once you break your fast. That will allow the body the largest window to break that food up, and then have your lightest meal closer to your bedtime, especially if you know you don't have a lot of time between that last meal before you go to sleep. So it's hard to really answer the question because it's case by case, and I would need the specifics to chat with that person about.
Okay, but it's okay if you are having one meal, if that's what it comes down to, if that meal is nutrient dense.
It needs to be nutrient dense. It needs to be alive and vibrant with vitamins and minerals. And it's why, like I said, many cultures are getting away with only eating one meal a day. And when I say heavy, it doesn't mean it needs to be a full plate of food. It's really the value of vitamins and minerals that meal is bringing to you.
Okay. And then when you're saying pass through, so 4 hours or 3 hours, and you're saying it should pass through, is that a bowel movement, or is that just the time that you're giving it and then you can eat again after that amount of time without a bowel movement?
So in this case, it's just passing through the stomach on into the small. It's the transit time that I'm referring to.
Okay, so then what role do bowel movements play in the time frame? Like after you eat, how long should it be before you have a bowel movement from that particular meal?
So for some people, it's within 10 minutes. For other people, it could be a couple of hours. The general rule of thumb is to understand whether you have healthy bowels or bowel activity. It's based on the number of meals you eat in a day. If you eat 3 meals a day, you should have at least 3 or more bowel movements a day. Okay, so when you eat, say the person that eats and within 15 minutes, they're having a bowel movement, they're not releasing what they just ate. The body is saying, I took in a new meal. Now I need to provide space. So I'm going to eliminate so that I can accommodate that current meal. So it's not that you're looking to pass out of your body what you just ate through a bowel movement. It's actually moving from one part of the digestive tract to the next in terms of the transit time.
Okay, great. And Coach Jay, we'll just wait till your camera comes back on before we ask your question, just so we know. Oh, so you're there. Okay, so someone wants to know if they can just pick yarrow in their backyard. Is it something that grows in that way, or how, if not, how should they find it?
So yarrow, generally, you're going to find it along the East Coast. It likes the dynamic of hot and cold weather. So if you find yourself finding it in your backyard, the biggest conflict that I would say where I would not use it is if it's sitting in the front of the yard and you're on a very busy street where it's being exposed to a lot of the carbon monoxide or dioxide that's going to be coming from the cars that are driving past, or if you're using pesticides. Other than that, you know, you can use the yarrow if you happen to find it in your backyard. So as long as you're not spraying any pesticides in your yard, it's definitely a go. So yeah.
But as a follow-up to that, does it also grow in the Caribbean?
Excuse me. I don't think it grows in the Caribbean because, again, it likes that dynamic of hot and cold weather. But if it doesn't grow in the Caribbean and you do want to get access to it, you can also order it from places like Mountain Rose, where you can get an organic form of it as well. I'm not sure. I'll definitely check on that, but I'm pretty sure it does not. I know that it's definitely part of North America, East Coast. And then it also has spread into Europe, China, basically those areas, again, that have that huge dynamic between hot and cold weather.
Okay, thank you. Coach Hayat, so we asked you this last time, but there's some people who are here for the first time or were not on the last presentation. So when you talk about eating meat and dairy and eggs and things like that, last time when we asked you, because in HeartSmarts, we're trying to move closer to being as close to plant-based as possible. So you're not telling people that they should eat those things. You're just saying people eat those things. And so if you're eating that, this is what you should do.
That's absolutely correct. That's absolutely. So when I'm meeting with clients, I'm meeting clients from different parts of their journey, where I have clients that are still eating those things. So since I still have clients eating those particular foods, I include it on a list so they'll know what to combine. But I am a proponent of plant-based, and I am aware, and I do educate my clients on what eating those things can do in terms of hindering their not only gut health, but their overall health. So yeah, it's just there for those that eat that way when I'm meeting someone at the start of their wellness journey.
Okay, great.
And
Thank
Dr.
you.
Tettey, I also wanted to mention, going back to when I was talking about the timeline of passage, the reason that I want to clarify for people, the reason when they eat a meal, it cannot be eliminated within 3 to 4 hours is because it has to go through a total of about 30 feet of internal plumbing. So it's not even doable to release that meal that they just ate. It's the body making room, eliminating something that was there from a previous meal, whether that, again, depending on the person's individual transit time for bowel movement. So there's two different things that we're referring to. During this presentation, I was referring to the transit time from the time we eat to the time it leaves your stomach. But then there's also a broader transit time from the time we eat to the time it exits the body through a bowel movement, which is going to be much longer.
So then what role does like taking a fiber supplement to help the process along? Is that a good thing to do? And what does that do when, say, someone takes psyllium husk or something like that?
Psyllium husk is something that I like for people to take when they're doing a protocol such as Jay's. The reason being is Jay is making sure that he's giving those individuals what they need to move that matter out of their body. Sometimes when a person is just doing psyllium husk and they're not educated about how best to take that, they're bringing that fiber in, they're not drinking enough water, and it just expands in their body, it goes nowhere. So you can get fiber through your fruits and vegetables, your raw fruits and vegetables. You can do psyllium husk when you're doing it with the right knowledge, and it will provide the means that you need. The other thing to keep in mind is that when we're taking things, it's going to be, again, an individual basis. For someone who's severely constipated, I personally would not recommend fiber for them, supplemental fiber, because what does fiber do? It creates bulk. The question is, if a person who's severely constipated may only have 1 or 2 bowel movements a month, they bring this bulk into their body. What happens when that bulk gets to the blocked area? It's going to add to the blockage. So it's, again, understanding the health of a person and making recommendations based on that.
Okay, thank you. Coach Jay, when you forage a wild herb, do you soak it in baking soda or vinegar, or just in case to remove the toxins? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. So when foraging wild herbs, I'm specifically going to areas where the soil is not treated so that I can simply just rinse it off. The goal is when you soak certain plants in like baking soda and or you're using vinegar, you're going to start to remove some of the volatile oils. In fact, when foraging, one of the rules of thumb is that a lot of the plant choices that you're going to use, if you happen to go out there immediately after a rainfall, you will not get the same quality of plants that you would as if you went out 2 days away from rainfall. What this does is it allows the plant to produce those volatile oils within its cellular structure. And this is what we use to make essential oils. So we want to make sure that that plant has those oils on it, and vinegar and baking soda, those things are going to strip those oils. So we want to make sure that we're harvesting from an ecosystem where the plants are managing themselves. So for example, there's a particular, we talked about a black walnut briefly. And the black walnut tree actually functions, it's not just in the walnut that it's killing bacteria and fungus and viruses and parasites. The entire plant does that, all the way, the entire tree, I'm sorry. And what happens is all of the plant communities around that tree are receiving an antiseptic into the soil. And it's literally killing anything and everything around it so that the plant communities that are around it can actually grow and be prolific. So nature kind of already disinfected it for us. We just need a quick rinse off, check for bugs, and go from there. So when I harvest, I'm generally just harvesting the actual plant, and I'm not using anything too strong to clean it. And again, you want to make sure you're harvesting from areas that they're not treating the soil, okay? Because if they're treating the soil, or if they're treating if they're using forms of like pesticides, those are by far way more dangerous to us than a little bit of dirt. In fact, as Ms. Hayat was just mentioning when we were talking about things like psyllium and bentonite, technically that combination is dirt and fiber. It's dirt and plants. That's all it is. And we're supposed to consume dirt. Dirt don't hurt.
Okay, awesome, thank you. So Coach Hayat, this is a question that was asked. Where does alcohol go in the chart and what should you combine it with?
Well, you've actually asked the wrong person because the alcohol I recommend people to stay away from. Alcohol is dehydrating, right? So the rule of thumb, I tell my clients for every glass of wine they drink 2 glasses of water to offset the dehydrating impact of that, right? But this actually goes back to what Jay was saying. When we consume our meals, we really should not be ingesting liquids, okay? It's going to put out the digestive fire and slow down the transit of food leaving our stomach, moving on through the rest of our digestive tract.
Thank you. All right, everyone hear that? All right, so Coach Jay, is there an herbal infusion that's safe to apply to the eyes for styes and chalazions? Yes.
So generally you don't need it for styes. However, I will say this, if there is form of styes building up, that leads me to asking a whole bunch of other questions as to the reasons why. But generally warm compresses are the go-to. Chamomile and cistus and canis, like I just mentioned, that I used for my little kitty cat, would actually work very well as well. So you can actually apply that. Some people even talk about using bright eyes. I'm not a big fan of using it all the time, but generally just warm compresses work well, or anything that's going to support the mucosa lining. And again, that leads right into chamomile, which is going to help to support that mucosa lining. But you definitely want to allow the body to facilitate that passing.
Thank you. Coach Hayat, is there a ratio of raw to cooked food that someone should try to consume in a day that's more beneficial?
Most people focus on a 80-20 rule. 80% raw, 20% cooked.
Okay, and then as a follow-up to that, what should be cooked? Is there specific foods that you would say, knowing that meat and stuff like that, if you're eating that, but say you're plant-based, what should you try to cook, and perhaps what should you not cook and preferably eat raw?
Well, there's a lot to that, to answer that, because there are some people that prefer, say, for example, spinach to be eaten raw, because in cooked form, it releases a specific type of acid that can cause some issues. But there's another belief that is fine cooked. We need to get to the point where we have to take note of how our body responds to our different meals. Because bottom line, you can have a book that will tell you that according to your blood type, say for example, you should eat these foods and avoid those. It's a foundation to start with. And there could be some things on the list of not to eat that you can eat and not have a reaction to. There could be something on the list you should eat that you may have a mild reaction to. It's understanding that you're being provided with information as a starting point, and we have to see how the body responds. I would just prefer people to understand when they're cooking their food, do not cook the life out of it. When you're cooking something that's green and vibrant, when you're finished cooking it, it should be green and vibrant. It should not be gray and it should not be mushy. It's to help ensure that we're still having vital qualities that's going to support our health and well-being, as opposed to being completely dead.
Got it. All right, thank you. Coach Jay, can you use the infusion as an enema?
Yes, actually you can. There are quite a few, some people have used coffee as an enema, and coffee is technically an infusion or a tea, so to speak. You're gonna have, yeah, you can definitely use your infusions as an enema.
And I can second that because I use infusions during the colonics as well. So yes.
Mhm. Green tea, I've seen also used as well.
Okay, and then as a follow-up, since that was a short one, where do you recommend purchasing loose leaf herbs? Mountain Rose Herbs, Co-op Frontier, Star West.
You can use all of them actually. Star West and Mountain Rose, those are generally my go-tos for the ones that I can't get my hands on. Mountain Rose is going to be a little bit pricier, even for wholesale. They're expensive, but again, you're getting it shipped from Canada, and they're trying to ensure that you're getting organically grown. But then you also have the option for wild crafted as well, which basically means somebody like me went out into the bush and found it next to another plant. And in my opinion, sometimes the wild crafted can be way more effective than the organically grown, because the organically grown is kind of, think of it like the difference between a domesticated animal versus an animal that's been living out in the wild. That animal has been learned to survive on its own, push through dense soil, deal with plants, bugs, animals, and everything else. That plant's DNA is very strong, and it's going to give you the information that you need, that you're trying to extract from it. Whereas some of the organic plants they're cultivated. So, we're growing them, they have the perfect environment. We're making sure that they're getting de-weeded. They don't really have much of a fight they don't have to really fight their way. They're given everything that they needed. So all of those companies work well, but I prefer Star West and Mountain Rose. There are some others as well, like Herbs of Mexico. That's another one, or I think it's called Herb Co. You can order from there. They also have some organic plants as well. But those are the primary ones you can order from.
Okay, thank you. Coach Hayat, do you have any suggestions for digestive enzymes?
Garden of Life has a good digestive enzyme. The one that I use personally is one by doTERRA called Terrazyme. And what I like about that one, it also has a component that helps with people that have a gluten sensitivity. And Jay, I thought that was one more that you recommended, or?
You referencing the ion biome, or?
I think that was it.
Yeah, that one is, it's kind of like a digestive enzyme, but it works specifically for two things. What it does is it contains a fossilized form of the bacteria litigine, which functions as an REM signaling mechanism to make the bacteria that's already in your body start to communicate to one another. Because sometimes we'll have bacteria when there's the presence of bad bacteria or fungus or parasites, they go into hiding. It's like they run into caves and they just don't come out because they don't want to get killed. So what that does is the ion biome allows the bacteria that are in the caves to get like a radio, so they can radio for help to other bacteria. Basically, that's one of the ones that I really like. There's a lot of good studies on it, and it's basically taken like a digestive enzyme. You would take a 1 teaspoon 10 minutes before a meal, and you definitely take it if you're going to have gluten. So, and what it does is it closes the desmosomes in the small intestinal tract, so it kind of makes them shrink, so you don't have those macromolecules falling through, because gluten basically strips your protection. It's not necessarily the gluten that kills you, it's everything else that you ate that kills you, because now you can't protect yourself from it. But yeah, that's the other one that I really like, next to Garden of Life. Garden of Life is just a digestive enzyme, but the ion biome is like a whole nother monster in and of itself.
And
which
where
works
would
like
someone get that?
So I think it's called I think they changed the name. I'll have to check for you. I know at one point they called it Restore, and I think now they call it Gut Ion Biome. You would have to actually go directly to the company, or you can reach out to my website. I usually keep some on stock as well. I use it intermittently with clients.
Okay, and so how does someone take the digestive enzymes? And the point of that question is, if we're not supposed to drink anything while we're eating, do you drink it? Do you take it with water, and do you take it at the same time that you're eating the meal?
So you want to take it at the time of eating, and that could be a window of 30 minutes before, and it could be 30 minutes after, but you don't want to take it more than an hour after the meal because you want it in the stomach at the same time as the meal. So basically, there's a couple of things you can do. If it's in capsule form, you can open it up, put a little bit of water, and take it down. Or depending on the size of the capsule or tablet, you could just need a little bit of water. And it's not going to be enough water. It's going to dilute the digestive process of that meal. You just don't want 8 ounces or more in your system because that will dilute your acids in your stomach.
Okay, and then Coach Hayat, another question for you. Does a colonic destroy the microbiome or colon cleanse?
Actually, it's a very good question, and it's a common question. So when you cleanse your colon, take a step back. There should be, when our colon is healthy, a balance of good to bad bacteria. When it's out of balance, the bad can start to take over. The good can no longer do its job of keeping them in check. When we start to clear the toxins and waste out of your colon, now there's a favorable environment for the good to thrive. Once they're able to put everything back in check because of that cleaner environment, then it's going to bring the colon, the gut, back into a healthy state. So you cannot honestly flush the bacteria out of your gut, your colon, during a colonic. Typically, anything that is within that flow are things that are ready to have died and are ready to leave your body to begin with, but they colonize in the mucosal membrane. So it's a myth, and it's something that I hear often. So it's a common question, but if you are doing colonics and you're doing them in a proper fashion, you're not going to run into that issue. And when I say proper fashion, believe it or not, you have people doing colonics for the weight loss aspect of it, and they're abusing the process. You don't want that.
Can I add to that? So
Sure.
I've ran into a few Western medical practitioners who mention how doing colonics will destroy the microbiome in the gut because you're ripping out all of the good bacteria, but then they never mention about all the bad bacteria that's out of whack, that's in the colon area. When it comes to detoxification or any type of process, you're always going to lose something good. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to lose a lot, but any and every detox, even when you're detoxing yourself, you're actually losing vitamins and minerals. When you're going through a fast, you're losing vitamins and minerals. When you get rid of parasites, they're stealing B12, vitamin E, vitamin A, they're taking those things with them. So there's always an understanding that there's a give and take with any detoxification process, because when you're trying to rectify an imbalance, remember the microbiome, those are living, breathing organisms inside of us. They want to live too. And in order for them to live, they got to take something from you. And in order for you to take them away, you're going to take them away, and they're taking whatever they took from you with them. So it's always a cost. And I find that a lot of Western medical practitioners sometimes tries to focus on the negative aspect to dissuade people from understanding what this process actually does, when in fact, yes, you may lose a little bit of good bacteria, but you're now putting your colon in a space where you can now plant new plants. It's like de-weeding your garden. You need to pull the weeds out so that you can plant new seeds. Other than that, if you're trying to plant new seeds on top of weeds, you can forget those seeds ever growing. That's what is going on. The gut is your earth, or your miniature earth inside your gut, and that's your soil. So we want to treat our soil and know that we do have to sometimes release a little bit of good. So you may pull up one good seed or two good seeds while pulling up all those weeds, but as long as you're putting that bacteria back in, the goal is to have a nice clean slate to work from.
Okay, great, thank you. And Coach Jay, this next question is for you. Do you happen to know if Traditional Medicinals brand is an unbleached tea bag?
I'm going to say they're bleached, but I always check every year. Usually they often change, but I'm pretty sure they have a bleached tea bag last I checked.
Okay, thank you. Coach Hayat, going back to the bowel movement question.
Mhm.
So in addition to how often they should occur, what should they be like in terms of texture, length, or smell, things like that?
They should be healthy. I mean, it should be quite a bit coming out. When they're coming out in the like pebbles or pellets, it's a clear sign that the person is constipated. Sometimes they come out with, how can I say, fermentation, bubbles and things of that nature. The color, the consistency. So when we are talking about, and I apologize, guys, when we're talking about poop, when it comes out, the color really should be almost like a fawn color, like a brown, yellow. When it starts to get, or sometimes a brown, orange color, but when it starts to get towards a darker, deeper brown and black, it's been in there longer. When it has an outrageous smell, it's an indication of how toxic that person's insides are. Literally, I have people describing it as though something crawled up inside of them and died. And that's because the longer we hold on to this waste, because we don't have bowel regularity, it's continuing to break down, it's continuing to rot, it's continuing to putrefy. Those things give off an awful smell. So you want to take those, and if you have to strain, you're definitely constipated. Straining will cause hemorrhoids, and you really want to do your best to avoid the straining. I know a lot of people take a magazine or newspaper in the bathroom with them. To be honest with you, when you have regularity, you won't have time to read. You should be in there and write out because everything is moving smoothly. So it should be healthy. If there was a lot of effort into that bowel movement and you look back and there's only these little bits and pieces, you're constipated. And many times people whose system's working properly, it feels effortless and they look back and it's a ton, but it didn't feel like that coming through. So those are signs to look for to determine whether you're constipated or not. But to be honest with you, you can turn your bowel movement and your eating into a math equation, which I presented in a prior presentation. If you're bringing in 3 meals a day and you're pooping once a day, that means you're storing the residue of 2 meals every day. You brought in 3, the body eliminated 1. So you're storing waste. And that's
And then there was something, I'm not sure if you mentioned it last time about the floating, like how the bowel movement should float once it's in the toilet in terms of with the water.
Yeah, sometimes it will float. Typically the lighter the food that we eat, a lot of vegetation and stuff like that, it tends to float. But when we're eating more dense foods, like a lot of meat and things of that nature, it tends to fall to the bottom of the throne, porcelain throne, yes.
Okay, but do you want it to float? Like,
I just want it out. I just want it to come out of your body. It really doesn't matter whether it floats or not.
You want me to jump in, Ms. Hayat?
Yeah.
I think that was one that I might have mentioned alongside something you were presenting. So I know when, depending upon what you're eating, we'll look at, the stool. And if you're consuming high fat foods and your body is not emulsifying the fats, and you find that you're eating meat and it doesn't fall, like Ms. Hayat said, it should be falling because it's dense and it's floating, then that means you're having unemulsified oils and lipids that are causing it, that may be contributing to it floating. So then the next question is, Is there something going on with your hydrochloric acid and or the gallbladder? It's not breaking those fats and oils down. So generally we want it to we want it out and we want it to sink and we want it to go down to the bottom. Some foods though, as Ms. Hayat said, like certain fruits and vegetables, because of how their compounds are made, they are gonna help the body to float. I mean, they're gonna make the pieces, the stool is gonna float. But if you're consuming dense foods like grains and things like that, and it's still floating, then that means the fats and oils that you consumed were not processed. So we want to be mindful of, how we can read the poop in the toilet, and the color, the consistency, all those things is information for us to know what's actually going on in the body, even as far as to the shape of the stool. Like if it has like an S curl at the end, we know that the sigmoid colon was released, but most of the stool pieces may only just be one solid carrot-like piece. And if it's carrot-like, then the sigmoid colon may still have residue in it because you didn't have a full, complete bowel movement. All that is information as to what to look for. So you want one solid piece with an S curl at the end in the toilet.
All right. Okay, so next question for both of you, actually. Is there a book that you recommend for food combining, and is there a book that you recommend for herbs?
I do recommend the book, but I always get his spelling mixed up. The name. Hold on, I have to write it. Meyer. Where do I have it? Do I have the book?
So food combining can get very technical or scientific. Some people just go at it in depth. If you want a book that's going to be easy to read, I would recommend the food combining principles is by a guy by the name of Stephen, and I'm going to spell his last name for you. And I have to write it while I spell it to get it right. MEYEROWITZ.
MEYEROWITZ.
Say that one more time.
MEYEROWITZ.
Yes, first name Stephen.
Okay. And is that
it
STEVEN or PHEN?
VEN, and it's Food Combining and Digestion is the title of the book.
Okay. And Coach Jay, thank you. Do you have one for herbs? You're on mute.
So I have one. It does talk about herbs, but it's more holistic health. But I like it because he goes into the practical application of some of the herbs that are mentioned, but it's not like an herbology book. You guys may be familiar with it. It's one that I've revisited, and it's like every time I look in it, it just drops new jewels. This is by Dr. Layla Africa. You guys probably be familiar with it. African Holistic Health. And he actually passed away a few years ago, but he goes into great detail and how to avoid that Western medical approach in the use of herbs. And then he names several herbs that you can use to help support different ailments. It's an amazing book from top to bottom.
Great. And Coach Jay, if someone wants to start growing herbs at home, for example, the yarrow, is that something you recommend, or are there herbs that are better to grow at home versus others?
No, you can grow yarrow at home. It is a very sturdy plant, so you can put it anywhere in your backyard and it should propagate. And there's different colors. I didn't find any pink or yellow, but there's often like a pinkish color. It's very beautiful. So if you happen to get the pink kind, it's going to be very gorgeous in your garden or wherever you put it. And it's going to draw, and it's definitely going to attract the pretty bugs. So expect to see some bees, but we like bees. We want them there.
And so any herb pretty much you can grow at home.
I would say pretty much anything that you want to try to grow at home, you can definitely get away with growing it at home. There are cases where, so sometimes I grow all different types of things. I'm currently been toying with the idea of growing things like mycelium, because I want to grow my own mushrooms. I want to eat my own mushrooms instead of going to the supermarket. So you can actually grow your own mushrooms if you get the proper tools to do that as well, and just start them and then put them in what we call a monotub. And it's like its own insulated incubator, so to speak. And, to me, I think that's probably the hardest thing to grow. Everything else is pretty easy for the most part, as long as you give it the proper environment. And there are going to be certain vegetables that you may, depending on the time of year that you're growing them, you may find some difficulty in allowing it to germinate. But for the most part, I find, if you can handle mycelium, then you can pretty much handle anything. So I'm going to say, yeah, you can grow anything you want, whether it's at home, in your backyard, or wherever.
Awesome, thank you. And for everyone in the meeting, we have a few minutes left. So if there's anything that either you asked earlier and I missed it and you want to make sure I ask it, you can type it in the chat, or if there's something that just came to mind, we have about 5 minutes left, so you can put it in the chat. Coach Hayat, we've heard from other people that you should not combine vegetables and fruits in smoothies. Are you saying because it's going to be liquefied, it doesn't really matter in that regard?
So that's a very good question. And that's why I call this food combining 101. When you're starting off, it's perfectly fine. It really depends on the quality of your blender. If that matter is broken down where there's no particles, it's just liquid, you're going to be fine. But some people, again, taking it beyond the basics, they don't combine. Even if they're doing protein shakes, they're not going to put fruits in there, So it really is, instead of approaching the combinations or food combining principles as dogmatic, it's going back to listening to how your body's responding to those things. So if you have a smoothie and you're combining the fruits with the vegetable and you find that you're bloated, then don't do it. You see what I'm saying? Change it up. And if you take that combination away and you notice that you're not bloated, your body's giving you a clear signal of what it can handle and what it cannot. Same thing with juicing. One of the questions earlier on in the chat was whether a person could put cilantro and other herbs in their juice when they're juicing. And the question is yes. Or the answer is, I should say yes, because again, there's no fiber remaining. There's nothing the body has to do but absorb that liquid from that juice combination. That could be fruit, herbs, vegetables, or all three together. So it really goes back to whether a person wants to be, really steadfast with the food combining, or giving themselves some grace and maybe still enjoying the things they enjoy. And if the body responds to a particular combination in a negative way, making a choice, do I take this combination out of my life altogether, or do I eat it here and there sparingly?
Great, thank you. Coach Jay, there's a question about fibroids. Are there herbs that help to dissolve fibroids? You're on mute.
So I can't legally say that there are herbs that help to dissolve fibroids. So I'll say this. When dealing with fibroids, the first thing you want to look at is the blood, because essentially it is the blood that is bringing whatever's being managed in the body to the location where the fibroid is growing. So if there's a fibroid or a cyst, something is carrying it to make it inflame, to make it swell, to make it collect. And the question is, who's bringing it? That would be obviously the blood. The blood would be the organ system that is the deliverer of these toxins that may exist inside the body. Oftentimes estrogen-based, or looking for estrogen-based receptors, which is why fibroids is such a big thing in the US. prostate cancer, breast cancer, anything that has to do with the endocrine system and or the sexual organs that have those receptors are going to be a big deal in the US because of the types of toxins that we're exposed to. So when managing the blood, you're going to want to use all the blood supporting herbs. So some of the formulas that I've used to help assist clients in managing fibroids are going to be things like hyssop, anything that's going to support the liver, because the liver is in charge of that filtration system that manages those toxins, especially things like artificial estrogen. So your dandelions, your burdocks, your hyssops, your milk thistles, your red clovers, all of those herbs combined are going to be used to help support the blood so that the blood can help to reprogram itself. Instead of carrying toxins to where they're going, you want to make sure it's carrying those toxins out the door. But then that also becomes very contingent upon whether or not this person is someone who can actually have a very good bowel movement. Because again, the flora and fauna of the woman's womb, sitting right on top of it, Ms. Hayat will be the first to tell you, is the sigmoid colon. And if the sigmoid colon is constricted, has an issue with cracks, fissures, lesions, ruptures, tears, openings, or it's congested or has poop next in its area 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because we're having incomplete bowel movements, then the environment for the womb is going to help to kind of petri dish the creation and proliferation of fibroids. So there are supportive herbs for it, but we kind of want to also expand a little bit beyond that, because any and every condition that we run into is always a lot of different contributing factors that causes it. The idea of one problem, one issue, one fix, that's Western medicine, and it doesn't really work for us that well. It's great for when it comes to crisis care, disease control, but when it comes to trying to understand where the imbalance is coming from, we got to expand it a little bit more. So if there was some herbs to help support, I would suggest those, and I would use them very, very frequently in their strongest method possible as a decoction, at least 4 to 6 times a day. And then I would use that for continuously for at least 2 to 3 months before I reassess.
Great, thank you. Coach Hayat, this question is from the same person, so I'm going to ask both. They're a little bit different. Can you explain beans and lentils as both proteins and starches, and can they be combined? For example, lentils and quinoa. And then I'll let you answer that, and then I'll ask the second one.
So when you have an opportunity to look at the food combining chart, you will find that there are some foods that are in more than one category. And lentils and peas are one of those. So I don't know if you guys ever wonder why when someone eats legumes that they become gassy. The reason they become gassy is that legumes are made up of both a protein and a starch by their sheer nature. And remember, during my presentation, I mentioned that those two combinations together are challenging for the body to break down. So in answer to the question, yes, you can eat those together. What I would give a tip to help ease the creation of gas is when you're eating legumes, you should properly soak those legumes overnight. Most people are skipping the step that my grandmother used to do all the time. I skip the step and I get in trouble. What happens when you soak the legumes overnight in water is helping to break down the cellular wall that's actually making it difficult to digest in the first place. So what happens in the plant world, when we want them, we can go out and we can pluck them. They can't uproot and run away. So sometimes in their own defense, they create things to prevent predators from eating them. So that challenge in us eating legumes is its defense, right, mechanism, but there's a way around it. You soak those legumes, you break down that cellular wall, and your body's going to be better able to digest them. Okay, so even though it seems confusing, they're in the protein column because they are a protein. My vegans use that as their protein source. they're also in the starch because they're also made up of starch. But they create gassiness if we don't soak them and cook them properly. And spices also help to break down or minimize the impact of feeling gassy and bloated after eating those. And you can also throw in digestive enzymes when you're eating those meals. So long story short, they combine well together.
Right. And can the acid, subacid, and sweet fruits be combined or only eat within that category like the melons?
Okay, yes, so melon, eat alone, don't combine it with anything else. But when it comes to of the 4 fruit subgroups, it's favorable to combine the subacid with the sweet without problem. Okay.
All right, and then Coach Jay, there's a question about, so this is a big question, it's not really a question. It just says, what about lupus and rheumatoid arthritis? And so if that's too big to answer in 30 seconds, right now, we can wait until the next time that you come back.
Like, what about it as in
The role of herbs.
the role of herbs? So really quickly, I'll try and do it in 30 seconds or less. So the role of herbs in rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, or any autoimmune imbalance basically is going to work synergistically with changes in the diet. That's going to be number 1. And then also number 2 is repairing the small intestinal tract, because 90% of people who have any type of autoimmune disorder also suffers from a condition called intestinal hyperpermeability, or AKA leaky gut. That's where you're going to have these macromolecules that are going to be leaking directly into the bloodstream, which is going to be contributing to that generalized pain, because those macromolecules are essentially not connected to the coenzymes that your body needs to identify it as something that's actually good for it. So when it gets leaked out, your body has an autoimmune response, and then you have this inflammation, you have this pain. Rheumatoid arthritis is oftentimes 60% of rheumatoid arthritis is also interconnected to what's it called? Candidus albicans overgrowth, because when you start to have damaged tissue in the connective tissue, that damaged tissue has to be repaired or fixed by what we call the lymphatic system. But if the lymphatic system is busy managing other things, then essentially your body starts to release this other fungus that is going to try to manage it. And then that causes pain and discomfort, because that particular fungus not only tries to repair the damaged tissue, but it fails it. And then it also poops in that area. So then that poop causes inflammation, and then you eat, and then 3 days later you feel like crap. But there's a really long list of approaches in managing those 2 things specifically. But diet is a huge factor, and then using herbs that are going to help to support the gut health, because again, gut health is interconnected with how well your connective tissue is structured as well.
Okay, and then
I try to give as much as possible.
So this leads into the next question. What herbs are good for leaky gut?
So surprisingly, one of the best ones to use is actually olive oil, which no one really considers. If you get your hands on a very good brand of olive oil and you use it regularly, so you're going to be taking anywhere between a half an ounce to an ounce intermittently, up to 4 times a day. And then what you want to do is you want to fast, but your fast is going to be a fast from proteins, okay? Because proteins are very difficult for the small intestines to manage. So if you consume and you're fasting for 3, I have a protocol where I have my clients go on a on and off 3 consecutive week fast from proteins. They'll only take a glycolized protein, which means they're either using something that's already broken down, or they're using a brown rice protein to assist in the detoxification of the liver. You're going to consume that for 3 consecutive weeks. It's very difficult, because fasting is one thing, but fasting from animal protein, fasting from all sorts of proteins can get very difficult. You're going to do that for three weeks. You'll be eating mainly fruits and vegetables, and then a glycolized protein like brown rice protein, which is not the tastiest of all the proteins. And that's going to provide you with very minimum protein. And then you're going to take the olive oil throughout the day. What that does is it's going to give the small intestines a break. It's basically you're shutting the oven off so that you can clean the oven. You're spraying oven off on it. That's the olive oil. So you can scrape that grime and grit off of the oven. And then after the 3 weeks, what you're going to do is you're going to cycle back on to your proteins of choice for 3 weeks, and then you're going to go back and do it again. This is done repeatedly, 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off, over the course of about 3 months, and then we reassess. There's other supportive herbs that are used during that time as well, but there's certain things that we want to avoid. So we try to avoid the very spicy herbs and plants and things like that that are going to irritate the small intestines during that time. And then you're going to use gastrointestinal supportive herbs. Your bitters obviously are going to help because that's going to help promote the emulsification of the bile. Bile is a detergent. It's an emulsifier. So essentially what bile is it's no different from like palm olive. You know, you put a drop of palm olive and it cuts through grease. Well, grease is a fat. Your bile is also a palm olive that's supposed to cut through the fat so that you can get everything nice and squeaky clean.
Okay, thank you. And then 30 seconds, are there any herbs that you recommend for thyroid issues?
Ooh, generally no, because and the only reason because most thyroid issues are going to be interconnected with something going on with the liver. So I would go with liver supportive herbs, but thyroid issues is like very broad spectrum. Sometimes iodine is needed, sometimes it's not. It really depends on what's going on with the thyroid. And you got to determine if there's an imbalance with with how the thyroid is processing your T4, or it could be a deficiency. It could just be a food deficiency. You may be missing the tyrosine, you may be missing the iodine because those two components are combined to make the T4 that it's supposed to be sent down to the liver. And oftentimes the liver may not be doing its job. So then the thyroid overproduces. So then the thyroid is trying to make something happen in the body. And every time it looks, it's not happening. So then, but the reality is it may actually be the liver. And 9 times out of 10, I would say about 70 to 80% of thyroid issues are directly related to the liver because the liver controls 20% of the hormone of the endocrine system. And the thyroid is like a peripheral organ. So when the liver is not doing its job, it's basically making the thyroid overwork. And then the thyroid doesn't want to overwork. And then eventually it overworks and explodes, or it starts to go off balance, so to speak. And really that root cause is, you know, looking at the liver. So supporting the liver is going to be one of the first things that you're going to want to do when it comes to addressing the thyroid. So your basic liver supportive herbs will be your dandelion root, your burdock root, sarsaparilla, hyssop, milk thistle, especially if there's issues with metal toxicity. Supplement wise, you're going to be looking at things like you can look at glutamine or L-glutamine, N-acetylcysteine. Those are going to be things that are going to help to assist in the removal of metals so that the liver can actually do its job as well.
Okay, and then this can be 30 seconds or less. What is the name of the author for the book that you shared, African Holistic Health? It's Layla Africa.
Oh yes, Dr. Layla Africa. It's Laila Africa, Afrika. He was actually, my book has on the bottom has a little excerpt from Dick Gregory, and he's back in that era, and he basically put a lot of information out that was way before its time. Regarding natural and holistic health and how Western medicine was kind of misconstruing things. It's a fantastic book. I always go back to it. You know, I'm gonna miss him because he was an amazing natural health practitioner. But yeah, definitely, that's something you want to make sure you have in your arsenal. It goes through a lot of different imbalances. Like even right here, it talks about herbs, vitamins, minerals, aminos, glandular food, sexual personality types. It even gets into the emotional aspect of healing and how certain emotions are tied to different organ systems. And I'm a firm believer that when you have different emotions and frequencies, those emotions are going to affect the organ system. So for me, when I had issues with my liver, it was because I had anger, resentment, and hate trapped, and that particular frequency produces a specific hormone that's going to affect a certain organ system when it's off balance. So you can't really say that emotions don't do anything when every emotion can be tied to a specific hormone or neurotransmitter that gets emitted from the brain. So it's kind of like an oxymoron. We know that if you feel a certain way, you're going to produce a certain chemical, and depending upon the length of time that chemical is going through the body, it's going to have a direct effect or a different effect on different organs or organ systems.
Okay, it's so interesting that you said that, because we're looking at you and the pictures that you shared, and just your whole aura is always so peaceful and happy, and we're wondering, were you always like that, or did you become this way after you made the change? But you don't have to answer that tonight. That'll be the next. You can tell us about your emotional journey to getting to this level of peace and happiness, where you're rescuing cats and all of that. But that'll be the next.
I have to have Miss Hayat with me. She's part of that journey.
All right, so Coach Hayat, the last question. If someone is leaving this meeting and thinking, well, I'm just gonna juice everything then, because that's the fastest transit and all of that, are there any downsides to perhaps just having a liquid diet? Is there a reason why we need to eat foods that we have to chew?
Yeah. Number one, you're going to get bored with that. We love textures. We want something to crunch on, you know. The other thing is when you're juicing and you have a top of the line juicer, there's no fiber left, right? It's just juice. We need fiber, right? We need the fiber coming from fruits and vegetables. So we need to have those salads. We need to eat the fruits and vegetables in whole form to get the fiber. So, I mean, I wouldn't recommend just going all out 100% from now on to your, you know, your rest of your days on this earth of doing juicing. You really need to bring in the fiber and eat food in whole form. Just chew, just chew properly.
Okay, awesome. All right, so for both of you, how can people get in touch with you? Do you take private clients, and do you take insurance? But starting with you, Coach Jay, because people have been looking for you and they said they called and they emailed, but they can't find you. So is there a best way to get in touch with you?
So I would say using the website is probably the best way. I've been having some difficulty holding on to my assistants. They've been kind of like leaving me. And that's because after I train them, they go off and become their own practitioner and they're doing their own thing. And it kind of leaves me as the administrator and the practitioner. And I'm trying to play the doctor and the pharmacist, and it gets very difficult. But definitely give us at least 48 hours to respond, especially if you contact us through the website. That seems to be the best way. I'm currently training another assistant to reach out to the clients and get everyone scheduled accordingly. As of right now, we're not taking on any individual clients, but we are rebuilding our store. So we're actually moving into being able to provide products that are able to, that are simplified enough, because in the past, I've mainly focused on what an individual requires as opposed to what works for the general populace. So definitely sign up to the website. All the emails are going to start coming much more frequently there, and you'll start seeing a lot of the programs that are going to be made available, such as the foraging, which we do in the tri-state area and things like that, as well as the upcoming Mars and Venus detox, which we'll be planning very shortly as well. That's going to be tentatively in October. And that's going to be built specifically for managing male and female hormones and how we're supposed to function specifically for one another and validate one another as well. So we'll have specific herbs for the masculine and then specific herbs for the feminine based on infradian and circadian rhythms.
Okay, so can you give the website address again?
Yes,
and then before you do that, there's someone who's really trying to get in touch with you. I won't say their name. So will you be extra attentive to the emails that you get tomorrow for people who are trying to get in touch with you?
Yes, I will. Yeah. So, or you can also, if you follow us on Instagram, you can send a DM to us on Instagram. And then I know I have someone that actually responds to my IG right now. So they'll go in and make sure that you get in touch with me immediately. And I'll make sure
so what's
that
the IG and then the website?
The IG and the website is Herbal Chemistry. Okay, so you can go to herbalchemistry.com. That's Herbal Chemistry spelled with a K instead of a CH. And then on Instagram, we are Herbal Chemistry, also spelled with a K instead of a CH. And then we have a TikTok, which is Herb Gotti, like GOTTI, on TikTok. And then we also have a YouTube channel as well.
Okay, awesome. And Coach Hayat, how can people get in touch with you?
Currently, the best way to get in contact with me is through phone via text or phone call. Hopefully my new website will be up in a couple of months. So it's 973-610-2779. And I can also type that in.
Okay. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us for this series. I hope you all benefited from it. We've had a lot of information. As I said, the previous videos are on YouTube. So if you need to watch again, or perhaps you should watch again, there might have been something you missed, or if you missed the entire session, everything is posted there already. Thank you all for your continued support of the HeartSmarts program. In the email today with the Zoom link, there is an option if you'd like to make a donation to the program. That's how we are able to bring these presentations to you. As awesome as everybody is, none of our presenters are free. So we are able to bring them to you through the support of our generous program members. So thank you all again for joining us. I hope you benefited from all of the sessions that we had. We will be back in the fall. So we are going to have the sleep and rest challenge for August, and take a break and have some fun and healthy fun. And Coach Hayat, I wanted to say to you, you gave us a new way to say that we want some dessert. So you said, my sweet tooth needs to be addressed. And I just thought that was very classy way to say that we want some dessert. So we will end on that note, but nobody's sweet tooth should be addressed this evening because it's late. So we should all go to bed. As we always say, the kitchen is closed. So again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Coach Hayat. Thank you, Coach Jamard, for your information tonight. You both were amazing. And thank you, everyone, for supporting the HeartSmarts program. I'm going to take you all off mute one more time. There is no meeting next week. However, on Monday, we have the finale meeting for the HeartSmarts participants. And if you all want to join us for that, to hear testimonies and all these great things that everyone is doing, you're welcome to as well. So good night, everybody. Thank you so much. And you can come off mute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Very
amazing.
Great information.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Stay
Excellent.
healthy,
Thank
everybody.
you, everyone.
You too.
Bye.
Take care. Be
Awesome.
well.
Awesome.